Pokémon, medicine and martial arts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 776 Separation and Togetherness. The backyard of the Oak Laboratory was once again quiet. What's wrong with everyone? Why are they all so quiet all of a sudden? Satoshi, somewhat slow to react, hadn't realized what was happening. Being naturally active and fond of the hustle and bustle, he simply felt a bit out of place in such a setting. Luckily, with Pikachu, a similar personality, for company, Satoshi felt less uncomfortable. Instead, they chatted happily, each enjoying bites of Hanako's freshly grilled food. As for Hanako, after conversing with Professor Oak, she went about her business. However, whenever she saw someone's bowl empty, she would enthusiastically place her own grilled food in theirs, encouraging them to continue eating. Perhaps Professor Oak had finally come to terms with his earlier emotions gone, and he joined in the eating. Ho, tonight is such a rare lively night. I can finally say goodbye to all my pastimes. Although instant noodles are delicious too, with all sorts of flavors to choose from, as they ate their delicious barbecue, occasionally sipping their drinks, life felt truly wonderful. As for the three people pondering nearby, it was Chen Kalen who ultimately made the first decision. Perhaps for some reason, before Chen Kalen could even articulate her decision, Li Zuner, though still uneasy, asked, Professor Oak, how long until the Kalos Region Pokemon League tournament officially begins? Kalos. After swallowing his food, Professor Oak finally began to recall the information he had about the Kalos Region Pokemon League. Oh, if you calculate the time, there's only about a month or two left until the Kalos Pokemon Center League tournament. If you're planning on going to Kalos, I'd advise against it. Even if you fly, you probably won't be able to make it in time for the opening ceremony. It would be better to explore other regions. If I remember correctly, besides Kanto, the Sinnoh Pokemon League tournament is held later, so you'll have about 7 or 8 months to prepare. Professor Oak quickly offered his opinion. Even though the two women hadn't mentioned anything about the Kalos region, Professor Oak knew a little bit about it. He sighed at GU's good fortune. When things were going well, he didn't think twice. So, only a month or two left. With only a month or two left until the Kalos Pokemon League tournament, Li Zuner lowered her head in frustration, appearing completely exhausted. Okay, don't be sad. I know Zuner desperately wants to see you, and so do I. It's just that the time isn't right yet. Let's take advantage of this period to grow stronger together, and then go find you together. As longtime friends, Chen Kalen quickly noticed something was amiss with Li Zuner. Combined with her previous conversation, she could quickly guess what she was thinking. Well, have you made up your mind? Or maybe you could return to China and challenge the Chinese region. But with your proud personalities, I doubt you'd go back to China in disgrace. I bet you'd want to do something spectacular like you before returning. After spending time together, Professor Oak had a pretty good understanding of both women. He knew their personalities well. That's right, Professor Oak, we've decided to stay in the island nation and challenge the Pokemon League. This time, it wasn't Chen Kalen who spoke first, but Li Zuner, who had been feeling a little down. Now, a determined look shone in her beautiful eyes. A look of high morale. So, are you two planning to travel together or separately? Professor Oak now posed another crucial question. Li Zuner and Chen Kalen didn't respond immediately this time. Instead, they exchanged a glance. Then, they quietly stepped aside and began to discuss. Sister Kalen, are we traveling together or separately? That's up to you. I really want us sisters to travel together. But if we travel together, we'll eventually have to face a battle. And if we travel separately, I'd be reluctant and worried about you. Chen Kalen, without a trace of concealment, spoke her truest thoughts. The final battle. Li Zuner now realized the true nature of the question. From the very beginning, or, to be more precise, from the very beginning, Li Zuner and Chen Kalen had set the goal of becoming the strongest Pokemon trainers. Therefore, challenging gyms, collecting gym badges, and ultimately qualifying to challenge the Pokemon League were all necessary experiences. Most importantly, both girls were aiming for the championship, and therefore, despite all the circumstances, they were incredibly confident in their own abilities. They were confident they could triumph in the Pokemon League and reach the final stage. Even though they were best friends, they ultimately had to decide the winner between the two of them. Perhaps this was a childhood pact between them, a relationship that wasn't blood, but more than that of sisters. But when it came to Pokemon battles, they showed no mercy and fought with all their might. While they despised this familiar pact, it still affected them to some degree when the final battle finally took place. Sister Kaylin, you're right. If we travel together, we'll have some support, but we can't avoid a final battle. While I know that final battle won't damage our sisterly bond, I still don't want to leave any regrets. Let's wait for the next opportunity to have that final battle. Chapter 777 Region Recommendations. Sister Kaylin, you're right. If we travel together, we'll have some support, but a final battle is inevitable. While I know it won't harm our sisterly bond, I still don't want us to leave any regrets. Let's wait for the final battle. Lizunar finally raised her face from her contemplation, a look of unprecedented seriousness on her face as she met Chen Kaylin's gaze. So, Zunar, have you made your decision? Chen Kaylin's face blossomed with a smile as they exchanged glances. It was just a glance, a single word, but as sisters who had known each other for so long, Chen Kaylin understood exactly what Lizunar was trying to say. That's right. I've decided we should travel separately. After all, I've been with Sister Kaylin for so long, and you've always been the one taking care of me. I haven't really experienced what it's like to live independently. I want to try living on my own without Sister Kaylin's care. Lizunar turned, leaving her back to Chen Kaylin. Her dress fluttered, and she gazed at the starry night sky ahead. Her eyes were filled with longing for the future. Indeed, it was just as Lizunar had said before. Because the two girls' grandfathers were very close, they both took the initiative because of their long-standing friendship. The two girls became best friends immediately after they were born. As they grew up, they were almost inseparable, but the older Chen Kaylin often took on the role of older sister to look after the younger Zunar. Although Lizunar didn't resent Chen Kaylin's constant care, she also wanted to experience what life would be like on her own. What would it be like to travel alone without Chen Kaylin? All of this was something Lizunar had long wanted to experience. She'd just never found the chance to bring it up with Chen Kaylin, but didn't today offer a good opportunity? I see. Then, Zunar, I respect your decision, but please take good care of yourself while you're traveling alone. She was always the older sister, after all. Even though Lizunar had already made her decision, Chen Kaylin immediately responded, her concern brimming with genuine affection. Sister Kaylin, I'll take care of myself. Don't worry so much. I'm not a little girl anymore, okay? Traveling alone means I'm an adult. Although her heart warmed, she felt a little embarrassed and awkward to hear Chen Kaylin address her in such public, as if she were lecturing her younger sister. Okay, I'm just worried you won't be able to take care of yourself. Don't cry if you get hurt when I'm not around. Glancing at the slightly embarrassed Lizunar, Chen Kaylin lovingly reached out her hand and scratched her delicate nose. Lizunar wrinkled her nose and uttered a few disgruntled hums of protest. No, let's meet at the top of our respective regions, each with our own glory. Lizunar clenched her fists, appearing quite imposing. After hearing Lizunar's words, Chen Kaylin, quite unusually, didn't flirt with them anymore. Instead, she spoke with a serious tone. Then let's meet at the top, each with our own glory. Don't get eliminated too early, or you'll be embarrassed when you meet Xiaoyu. Ha. So you've made your final decision now, haven't you? Seeing this scene, a rare surge of passion welled up in her. Professor Oak's long dormant heart suddenly flared with excitement, and he couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh. Professor Oak, we've decided, the two women said in unison. After hearing each other's simultaneous voices, Lizunar and Chen Kaylin exchanged a tacit glance, then smiled. They said in unison once again, we've chosen to travel separately. Ha separately? Separate trips? That's fine. In that case, let me recommend a few areas for you. With 2 meters accurate answer, Professor Oak's smile grew even brighter. For in that moment, he could almost see young men and women emerging from the small town of Pallet Town, their fame resonating throughout the regions. Well, Professor Oak, please tell me. What do you recommend? Actually, there aren't many areas I can recommend. After all, the island nation's territory isn't as vast as you've been demarcated to be. There are only a few regions. But these areas are more than enough for you right now. Once your reputation reaches every region, that will be the time for you to officially step onto the international stage." Professor Oak stroked his chin, lost in thought, but mostly in longing. It was only the beginning. These children hadn't even taken the first step toward becoming trainers. But at that moment, Professor Oak couldn't help but indulge in a fantasy, to make the civilization of Pallet Town a global sensation. Although, thanks to his fame, Pallet Town had once made a name for itself on the global stage, for Professor Oak, a Pokemon trainer of the older generation, none of this could compare to the awe-inspiring, admiring moments of reaching the pinnacle of power. "Hey, Kalen, why don't you go to the Hoenn region, and Zuner, you go to the Sinnoh region?" The overall strength of the Pokemon leagues in these two regions is still very strong. Moreover, there is still a long time before the league conference is held in these two regions, which is enough time for you to develop. After just a moment of fantasizing, Professor Oak quickly gave the two girls the regions they would go to in the future, and also gave a detailed introduction to these two regions. Chapter 778, Bickering. The Sinnoh region? I heard the champion of the Sinnoh Pokemon League is a girl. I really want to meet her. Lee Zuner quickly dug up information about the Sinnoh region. Unlike Lee Zuner's excitement, Chen Kalen simply nodded calmly. Since they had already decided to travel separately, she needed to think about some things for the trip. "Grandpa, I've made up my mind. I'm going on a trip with everyone right now. Since everyone's already traveling, how can I be left behind? I don't want to lose from the start. And I don't want to give Satoshi any reason to laugh at me." Just as Professor Oak was conversing with Lee Zuner and Chen Kalen, Xiaomao, who seemed to be quietly contemplating the gains and losses, quietly pricked up his ears to eavesdrop on their conversation. Upon hearing that Chen Kalen and Lee Zuner, who had come here to study with his grandfather, were planning to travel together at this time to gain experience, Xiaomao immediately became restless. So, after Professor Oak finished describing the recommended destinations, Xiaomao finally stood up eagerly and shouted to his grandfather. "Xiaomao, are you really determined? Once the arrow is shot, there's no turning back." Professor Oak nodded in satisfaction, but he still felt a certain degree of worry about his grandson. "Don't worry, Grandpa, I'm determined. Not only that, I'm determined to win the Kanto League tournament. I'm determined to win the championship." Xiaomao's spirit was so high that even his goal was starting to recover. However, as soon as he said this, he immediately angered someone else. Of course, that person was Xiao Satoshi. Xiao Satoshi, who had been enjoying a feast with Pikachu, immediately jumped out, dissatisfied. "Xiaomao, don't brag so much. I'm the one who will definitely win the Kanto Regional Pokemon League." Tisk, how could a tournament like the Kanto Regional Pokemon League possibly allow someone as simple-minded and strong-armed as you to win? Whether it's Pokemon battles or anything else, it all depends on brains, not brute force. Although Xiaomao didn't have a Pokemon yet, he wasn't the least bit nervous when faced with Xiaozhi, who already had one, and immediately scoffed with disdain. Indeed, in Xiaomao's impression, Xiaozhi was exactly what he described. "Stop the nonsense. I'm the one who'll definitely win the Pokemon League." "Nonsense, I'm the one who'll definitely win. It's me, that's right, Xiaozhi, just stand aside, you're the one." In an instant, the two of them were arguing fiercely, their heads rubbing against each other in excitement. But because neither was convinced of the other's loyalty, their heads kept butting. The crowd around them was stunned. Even then, more and more Pokemon gathered around. It was clear that the Pokemon this time were Professor Oak and his group. They were all eager to take part in the frenzy, taking on the crowd. It's me, I told you I'd win, and in the end, I'll definitely be the winner." Xiaomao and Xiaozhi were fighting like two women, tearing at each other, their clothes ragged. "What's wrong, Xiaozhi? Are you really not convinced?" "I'm not convinced, so why do I want to fight? Come on, let's decide the outcome." Two invisible auras began to emanate from Xiaozhi and Xiaomao. Professor Oak even saw the shadows of two terrifying beasts, a true battle between dragons and tigers. Just when everyone thought a brawl was about to break out, Xiaozhi's face betrayed him, his initial fervor fading as he waved his hands repeatedly in Xiaomao's direction. "Oh my, how could I forget, Xiaomao? You don't have any Pokemon. How can you possibly have a Pokemon battle with me when you don't even have a single Pokemon? Wow, you're just too weak. I didn't expect you to challenge me to a duel without even a single Pokemon." As he spoke, Xiaozhi quickly scooped up Pikachu, who was munching away beside him, and swaggered around in front of Xiaomao with a smug look on his face. Seeing Xiaozhi swaying Pikachu in front of him was particularly annoying. Xiaomao couldn't help but feel a vein throb on his fair forehead, and his hands involuntarily clenched into fists, wishing he could just punch Xiaozhi in the face. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to suppress the urge to strike. When Xiaomao turned to look at Professor Oak again, the once ferocious expression of anger had vanished, replaced by a pitiful expression that made his lips twitch. "Grandpa, I've decided to travel during this time. So, can you give me my Pokémon now? I don't want the starter 3, just any decent Pokémon." Xiaomao's requests were constantly lowering, desperate to get his first Pokémon as quickly as possible. Professor Oak was astonished. Was this still his grandson? Perhaps influenced by his parents, he always demanded perfection, even first place. But now, he was willing to settle for second best, not even a perfectly good Pokémon. "Xiaomao, are you sure? You don't want a highly qualified Pokémon? You know, starting Pokémon are no joke. They're there to accompany you in your early days, before you've fully grown as a trainer." Although he had his own plans, Professor Oak couldn't wait to test his grandson's resolve with words. After all, despite his words, Xiaomao was his grandson after all. As a grandfather, how could he not give him some support? Chapter 779 Touched. "I'm absolutely certain. You know who I am? I'm your grandson, Grandpa. It's just a Pokémon with a slightly inferior aptitude, isn't it? I'm sure I can raise it to great heights. I'll even take my starter Pokémon to the finals of the Kanto Pokémon League." Xiaomao exuded radiant confidence at this moment. Both his words and his expression reminded Professor Oak of his former son and himself. "Ha ha ha, great, you're worthy of being my grandson of Oak Snow City. That's the kind of aura I want. Follow me, and I'll give you the starter Pokémon you want." Professor Oak laughed heartily and immediately turned to head towards his Oak Research Institute. "Everyone, come along and take a look." With a greeting, everyone followed Professor Oak and Xiaomao into the institute. Led by Professor Oak, they arrived at his usual research location. This time, however, facing his favorite research site, Professor Oak didn't pause. Instead, he walked straight toward a door without even turning. "Everyone, come in. This is where we usually keep our Pokémon. The Pokémon that trainers transport back from their travels are also stored here." Professor Oak explained the interior as he walked toward a cabinet. Within this Pokéball storage room, there were several rows of shelves. The neatly arranged rows of Pokéballs on each shelf were a dazzling sight. Furthermore, among the red and white Pokéballs, there were occasional rare Pokéballs. Wow, so this is where the Pokéballs are stored. It's so huge, it's so huge. How many Pokéballs are in this vault? Looking at the countless Pokéballs, Xiaozhi couldn't help but ask. In response to Xiaozhi's question, everyone else was also wondering. The Pokémon stored here, including those from the lab and those left by traveling trainers, should be close to 1,000. Professor Oak could only offer a rough estimate. He had to observe and research Pokémon daily while also caring for the other trainers' Pokémon. His words seemed uncertain, but as the head of this lab, interacting with Pokémon daily, how could he possibly not know the exact number of Pokémon in his lab? It was simply because the Pokémon there were so many. Furthermore, the pleasant environment of the hills behind Professor Oak's lab meant that wild Pokémon from nearby would occasionally wander in. With the Pokémon population increasing, it was inevitable that a few would become pregnant unexpectedly and lay Pokémon eggs. It was a near daily occurrence, so Professor Oak could only offer a rough estimate. So many Pokémon? The Oak Research Institute truly lives up to its name as a Pokémon paradise. Professor Oak is amazing, isn't he? He managed to summon such a large research institute all by himself. Without a single assistant. I heard there are around 700 or 800 species of Pokémon in the world, but Professor Oak's research institute already has over 1,000. Isn't it like Professor Oak's research institute has every Pokémon in the world? Everyone was discussing the matter, and Li Zuner asked a question that caught everyone's attention. Professor Oak, who was walking ahead, stopped in his tracks upon hearing Li Zuner's question. He turned around, looking at the group of people, and a loving smile reappeared. "Zuner, you think too highly of me. There are 700 or 800 species of Pokémon in the world, specifically, Pokémon types. This isn't just about sheer numbers, if we're talking about numbers. The number of Pokémon in this world is probably even greater than our own, and yet, within my research institute, there are still countless undiscovered Pokémon. This is all thanks to the traveling trainers who capture and transport their Pokémon to me, a tremendous help, allowing me to see all sorts of Pokémon from around the world. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to complete this massive research project on my own. Professor Oak's words were filled with deep emotion as he spoke. He also expressed his admiration for the profession of Pokémon trainer. Regardless of their abilities, Professor Oak was generally grateful to them. Grandpa, don't worry. When I become a Pokémon trainer, I'll definitely help you complete the Pokédex. I'll show you all the Pokémon in the world, so you can research them and become friends. Xiaomao's eyes were determined, and his ambitious words came out without hesitation. Since Xiaomao had spoken, it was only natural that Xiaozhi, his formidable rival, would not be far behind. Professor Oak, I'll do the same. I'll convince many Pokémon to show them to Professor Oak. Professor Oak will help too. Li Zuner and Chen Kalen also spoke up at this time, their admiration for the old man before them immense. This was an old man who truly loved Pokémon. It could even be said that he had dedicated the majority of his life to Pokémon. Well, thank you all. I'll be waiting for your results at the Research Institute. Professor Oak felt a warm warmth in his heart. However, his mood was short-lived, as it was shattered by an untimely voice. Xiaomao, what's that Pokédex you were talking about? Is it a new Pokémon? Let me take a look. Xiaozhi's voice rang out with curiosity, not paying any attention to the heartwarming and touching scene. Although it was only a normal volume, and as if to save face, he quietly asked Xiaomao beside him. But what was happening now? It was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop, and even the smallest sound was still clearly heard by everyone. Chapter 780, Professor Oak's Mysterious Gift. Xiaomao, what is this Pokédex you just mentioned? Is it a new Pokémon? Let me take a look. Xiaozhi's voice rang out with curiosity, without paying any attention to the heartwarming and touching scene at the moment. Although it was just a normal volume, and as if to consider his own face, he quietly asked Xiaomao next to him. But what is the situation now? It was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop, and even the smallest sound could still be heard clearly by everyone. At this time, even Hanako, who is a mother, couldn't help but cover her face, looking ashamed to face people. Xiaomao and Professor Oak couldn't help but twitch their mouths a few times. We have such a good relationship. You come to my grandfather's house to play every day, and you are almost as familiar with this place as I am. Now you ask me what the Pokédex is? Although he was speechless in his heart, Xiaomao still resisted the urge to type for a while and patiently explained, the Pokémon Encyclopedia is a kind of thing that has been jointly researched by famous Pokémon research doctors and scholars in every region of the island country. There has been a gradual study of Pokémon, and there are various instruments that record messages and so on. Xiaomao is right. The Pokémon Encyclopedia is something that are current and the world's famous Pokémon doctors are conducting research and improvement. Professor Oak took over the topic at this time. After all, no matter what, this is his professional field. It is not a big deal to let his grandson explain it for him. What's more, Xiaomao doesn't know much about it. The Pokémon map not only records Pokémon information, but also serves as proof of a Pokémon trainer's identity. It's something every new trainer receives from us when they travel. It's worth mentioning that the Pokémon guide I gave you has, through the feedback I've received over time, already contains information on over 100 Pokémon species. Is you that impressive? I guess I should leave early, or I'll be left behind. Xiaomao, whose ambition since childhood had always been to surpass you, lit up upon hearing about Yu's travel achievements, looking eager to try. Not only him, but even Xiaozhi, Chen Kalen, and Li Zuner were all gleaming with anticipation for future trips. Yet, that little guy, Yu, is really working hard. According to the news he sent back a while ago, Yu's achievements in the Kalos region are quite impressive, having already earned 6 gym badges. He's currently challenging the next gym, 100k gym. If he successfully obtains the gym badge there, then Yu only needs to obtain the final gym badge to qualify for the Kalos Pokemon League. As if to inspire the group before him, Professor Oak unreservedly shared Yu's news with everyone, simply to give them more motivation to pursue their dreams. Is Yu already that good? Damn. He only started a few months earlier than us, and yet he's already reached this level? But if it were me, I'd definitely be able to do that. Xiaomao, upon hearing Yi Yu's news, was filled with admiration, yet also a bit frantic and irritated. After all, he considered Yi Yu his rival, even his goal. But he hadn't even set out yet, and his target was already slipping out of his sight. How could he not be anxious? Yi Yu, will he qualify for the Kalos Pokemon League tournament soon? If so, can we go watch Yi Yu compete, unlike Xiaomao's outburst of dismay? Xiaozhi offered nothing but congratulations and well wishes to Yi Yu. For a rookie like him, barely even a complete novice, Yi Yu's achievement was truly impressive. He even considered attending the tournament to cheer him on. Xiaozhi wasn't the only one who shared this sentiment. Li Zuner and Chen Kailin, both of whom had impressive results, were also happy for Yi Yu, especially after hearing Xiaozhi's request. They all looked eagerly at Professor Oak, hoping he would grant their request and come to cheer their beloved on. Of course you can. After all, soon you'll all be rookie trainers embarking on your journey. You'll have to plan your own itineraries then, so you don't need to ask me. If you want to go and cheer Yi Yu on in person, please let me know. I'd love to see him then, too. Professor Oak's face was filled with anticipation. He was eager to see what kind of results this young man, who had been studying with him for so long, would achieve after a few months of travel. Alright, don't get so excited now. I'm sure you'll all be able to excel at the tournament through your training. Now, Xiaomao, I'll take you to see your starting Pokemon. Stay tuned, it's a mysterious surprise. As expected of the oldest and most experienced of the group, Professor Oak, after a brief moment of excitement, turned everyone's attention back. Really, Grandpa? Have you really prepared some mysterious gift for me? Xiaomao's eyes were already glowing green, and he was already speculating about the identity of the Pokemon. His grandfather, Professor Oak, held a pivotal position in the entire island nation's Pokemon League. Giving him a few rare Pokemon wouldn't be a problem. His previous words were probably just a test. That's right, they were probably just a test of his own state of mind. After all, if he was truly going to give himself a precious Pokemon, he would have to maintain a calm demeanor and not get too excited. Otherwise, no matter how good the Pokemon was, it would likely become useless in his hands. Chapter 781, The Unfathomable Profundity of Professor Oak. Grandpa, what Pokemon have you prepared for me? Stop keeping me in suspense and tell me now. I can't wait any longer, Xiaomao hurriedly urged, only to be quickly waved away. No, please stop talking and let me guess. It's more fulfilling and exciting that way. Oh, in that case, guess. Professor Oak didn't bother interrupting his grandson's elegant mind. He simply paused and listened quietly once more to what Pokemon his grandson would come up with. Let me think, could this Pokemon be Suicune, just like you? Upon hearing the name of his grandson's legendary beast, Professor Oak's face darkened, and he pulled the corners of his mouth stiffly. This time, Xiaomao was very considerate. Seeing his grandfather's face turn as dark as the bottom of a pot, he immediately shook his head and denied his own guess. No, it can't be Suicune, right? Then could it be Raikou or Entry? After all, no matter how bad it is, it can't be that far below Yi Yu, right? But as Xiaomao speculated, Professor Oak's face grew darker and darker, until it even tinged with a hint of grandeur, clearly irritated. Why hadn't I noticed before that? Besides being its son dear, this grandson of his was also quite imaginative. These are the three sacred beasts. What do you think they are? Cabbages? You see them everywhere on the street. If it weren't for your hobby that gave your grandfather the privilege of meeting Suicune, I probably wouldn't have ever seen one in my lifetime. And yet, you just asked for three straight away. Damu wasn't just furious, a hint of shame crossed his face as he spoke, but more than that, he was grateful. He was grateful to have met you, and therefore, thanks to him, to be able to study the sacred beast Suicune. Tisk, you don't even have the three sacred beasts? Then you probably don't have any higher level legendary beasts either. I never thought you'd need you to fulfill your wish to see a legendary beast, Grandpa. You really disappoint me. Xiaomao shook his head, feeling deeply guilty about Professor Oak's fate. He'd never imagined that the renowned Professor Oak had barely seen a single Pokemon in his life. Yet, precisely because he hadn't seen a legendary beast, he'd become a renowned Pokemon researcher and professor in the Pokemon world. This alone spoke volumes about Professor Oak's extraordinary and remarkable abilities. But for Xiaomao, who had just celebrated his coming-of-age ceremony, all this was empty talk. Seeing something with your own eyes was the only way to feel real. Xiaomao considered himself incredibly lucky. He could easily find a few bucks while wandering around, buy a drink, and even open a second one. Even his family's fortunes were typical of the rich second generation, or even the rich third generation. This was the perfect protagonist template, wasn't it? Therefore, Xiaomao thought, it was just because he hadn't traveled. If he had, what kind of mythical beasts would he not have seen? Then, he could capture whatever mythical beasts he wanted, no need to feel so frustrated now. However, if conditions allowed, he would definitely capture every mythical beast he encountered. Bringing them back to the Pokemon Research Institute would astonish his grandfather and impress him. Just as Xiaomao was completely lost in his own thoughts, Professor Oak seemed to be furious at what he said. His face flushed red as he began to defend himself. Nonsense, what do you know? I was just being humble, and you took it seriously. You even gasped when I told you were fat. You know, when I was young, I encountered the legendary Celebi while traveling. Professor Oak's tone was tinged with pride as he spoke. That's perfectly normal, after all. Compared to the three sacred beasts, Suicune, Celebi is still far rarer and harder to find. Upon hearing the information contained in Professor Oak's words, everyone present was stunned. Celebi, the legendary sacred beast capable of traveling between the present, the past, and the future, really, Professor Oak? I didn't expect you had such a glorious history in your youth. I'm sure you must have been incredibly lucky back then, at the peak of your life, the sacred beast Celebi? We'd love to meet him too, Professor Oak. When and where did you meet Celebi? What did you spend time with? Tell us. It wasn't clear who was asking, but the topic had finally hit the mark. At this point, Professor Oak seemed to have recovered from the situation. He simply gave an enigmatic smile and didn't respond. However, no one noticed the fleeting disappointment in his eyes. The Buddha said it cannot be explained. Fate is a very strange thing. When your destiny arrives, perhaps you will encounter a certain Pokemon. This is the joy of traveling as Pokemon trainers. Reunion leads to separation, and separation leads to reunion. After this cryptic speech, Professor Oak and his companions finally arrived at their destination. Before them lay a machine resembling a Gashapon machine, filled with red and white Pokemon balls. The sight of this densely packed machine would probably terrify anyone with trypophobia. Professor Oak, what's this? What kind of machine is this? A Gashapon machine. The appearance of the machine quickly drew the attention of everyone who was about to ask more questions. Xiaomao's face was filled with excitement. If it weren't for his tsundere personality and a desire to save face, he'd have leaped directly onto the new lit machine and given it a few hearty kisses. Wow, Grandpa, I knew you were the best. Are all the Pokemon in this machine for me? Haha, thank you so much, Grandpa. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 782 Gachapon. Wow, Grandpa, I knew you were the best for me. Are all the Pokemon in this machine for me? Haha, then thank you so much, Grandpa. Xiaomao was completely overjoyed. Thinking she had guessed the truth, she immediately lunged towards the Gachapon machine. However, the next moment, no matter how hard Xiaomao pushed forward, she couldn't move an inch. Xiaomao finally realized something was wrong and finally came to his senses. Looking at his hands and feet, suspended in midair and still controlled by his own mind, he blinked in confusion at first, but soon he was furious. Grandpa, what are you doing? Let me down quickly so I can see my starting Pokemon. I can feel how eager my starting Pokemon is to meet me. No matter how Xiaomao screamed, Professor Oak remained unmoved, though a slight blush could be seen on his old face. It's embarrassing, so embarrassing. It's just a Pokemon, isn't it? Although your behavior shows your love for Pokemon. But if people who don't know think that I, Professor Oak, am abusing my grandson? I haven't even let him see or touch a Pokemon since he was a child. If this gets out, it will be really embarrassing. At this time, Xiaomao was still kicking around, and Professor Oak almost lost his grip and let him rush out again. Come on, when did I say I would give all these Pokemon to you? You little guy, just shut up. Aren't these Pokemon all for me? Then what are these Pokemon for? Are they for my future? Then they are for me. Xiaomao was stunned at first, blinked his confused eyes, and then directly said what he was thinking again. I'm sorry, these Pokemon aren't for you. They're all mine. Well, to be more precise, they're the offspring of my old friends, or some I recently captured for research. Professor Oak's next words shattered Xiaomao's beautiful fantasy. Seeing Xiaomao on the verge of tears, looking at the Pokeball in front of him, wanting it but unable to obtain it, Professor Oak was really fattening up his grandson. Why hadn't he realized before that he had a talent for acting? But his grandson was quite handsome, otherwise he wouldn't have so many girlfriends at such a young age. So, maybe he should consider making him the first woman? Otherwise, it would be a waste of his talent. While thinking about this unrealistic thought, Professor Oak quickly spoke up. Okay, don't be too upset. The mysterious surprise I told you about is indeed this Pokemon Gachapon. You just have to choose a Pokemon from this Gachapon to be your next starting Pokemon? Xiaomao exclaimed, not confident at all. He hadn't heard correctly, had he? A Pokemon randomly selected from this Gachapon to be his starting Pokemon. He didn't even know what the Pokemon inside were like, and this random selection was just leaving it to fate. How could this be considered a new trainer's starting treatment? New trainers at least choose the starter Pokemon, and at least they know what they are. They have the Pokemon laid out in front of them for them to choose from. But now it's his grandfather's turn, and he's even skipping the steps for his grandson. Xiaomao was actually a little scared, not knowing what his grandfather was thinking today. He actually let him pick any Pokemon from this Gachapon to be his starting Pokemon. Putting aside the actual aptitude of the Pokemon in this Gachapon machine, let's just say they're all newly hatched. If you pick an older Pokemon, you'll be seriously out of luck. While the Pokemon at this stage is older and initially quite powerful, its aptitude and potential for improvement are definitely less than what you get from newly hatched, growing Pokemon. Especially with older Pokemon, their levels and power have already reached their peak. While they might be quite formidable in the early stages, their physical endurance and other physical functions will inevitably fall behind those of newer Pokemon as time goes on. As Xiaomao's grandfather, Professor Oak could clearly discern his grandson's thoughts. He immediately reached out his large, rough hand and stroked Xiaomao's hedgehog head. Don't worry, kid. The Pokemon I'm getting this season are all genuinely new. Really? Grandpa, don't lie to me. I've only heard of people cheating their parents, but never their grandchildren. Xiaomao was a bit skeptical. Although he questioned Professor Oak's words, his hands moved without slowing down. He had already reached the switch on the Gachapon machine. Hurry up. I'm sure you're eager to see your first Pokemon soon, Professor Oak urged with a smirk. At that moment, the room fell silent once again. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Xiaomao's movements, as if he were doing something extremely serious. The atmosphere was completely aroused. Snap, snap, snap. As Xiaomao flipped the switch on the Gachapon machine, the sound of Pokeballs colliding and rubbing against each other echoed. In that brief moment, time seemed to be moving in a mirror, or in slow motion. Each roll of the Pokeballs lifted the hearts of the spectators. The frictional sound echoed in their ears, giving them an inexplicably wonderful and refreshing feeling. Clang. Finally, after an unknown number of tumbles, a red and white Pokeball finally rolled out of the Gachapon machine. Chapter 783 Xiaomao's initial Pokemon. Reaching out with a hand trembling with excitement, Xiaomao retrieved the Pokeball from the Pokemon Gacha machine. While he was incredibly excited, he was also filled with a greater sense of trepidation. For a moment, he'd forgotten to open his newly acquired Pokemon and release the Pokemon inside. Xiaomao, hurry up, open the Pokeball and see what's inside. Finally, it was Xiaozhi, his best friend and rival, who, upon seeing Xiaomao holding the Pokeball in both hands, he hesitated to release the Pokemon for everyone to see, and immediately urged him anxiously. Yes, Cap, since everyone is so eager to see what's inside this Pokeball, why don't you release it quickly? I'm also eager to see which child will become your first partner. Professor Oak was also curious. Although he was the one who caused all this, the thrill of winning a Pokemon through a lottery still filled him. After all, everything was still unknown, wasn't it? If Xiaomao hadn't been warned from the outset, everyone would have speculated that Professor Oak might have mixed in with some legendary or quasi-legendary Pokemon. However, while none of these rare and valuable Pokemon were present, this gesture alone was enough to capture everyone's attention and curiosity. Well, I'll leave it to fate. With a resigned air, Xiaomao's eyes fixed on the red and white Pokeball he held. Just when everyone expected Xiaomao to toss the Pokeball and release the Pokemon inside, something truly astonishing happened. Xiaomao, despite standing up at the sales counter, didn't toss the Pokeball. Instead, he gently held it in front of him and, as if kissing a loved one, gave it a passionate kiss. "Come out, my dear, and let everyone see your true form." Xiaomao tossed the Pokeball in a graceful arc, exploding midair. A small creature, enveloped in a red glow, emerged from within. As the glow gradually faded, the creature inside began to reveal its true form. At first glance, all that was visible was a shiny head. A closer look revealed a small turtle with large purple eyes, 3-toed limbs, and a small, wavy tail. Squirtle's body was light blue, encased in a hard shell. The shell's back was brown, its belly light yellow, and a wavy white border separated the two. Squirtle, as if it had been inside the Pokeball for too long and was curious about what was outside, the little creature, as soon as it appeared, began to survey its surroundings with its large, radiant eyes. He wasn't shy after a good meal, and when he saw everyone staring intently at him, he showed no sign of shyness. Instead, he smiled sweetly at them, his soft voice constantly calling out, as if greeting them. Furthermore, the little creature seemed to know who his trainer was. Upon seeing Xiaomao, he immediately ran over and hugged his trainer's thigh. "Wow, that's it. One of the Kanto region's original 3 starter Pokémons, the water-type Squirtle." It was Satoshi who first reacted, his gleaming eyes fixed on Squirtle's slender figure. As if noticing the lineup, a pair of wolf-like eyes glared at him with ill intent. The little Squirtle couldn't help but shrink, as if deciding this wasn't safe enough. After a moment's thought, he retreated into his shell. However, Satoshi seemed oblivious to Squirtle's gaze, his gaze still fixed on him. "It's Squirtle. It's Squirtle. This is one of the Pokemon I've always wanted to get. Of the starter Pokemon, Charmander and Bulbasaur are both great. But Squirtle is pretty good too." As he spoke, Ash involuntarily began to move closer to Squirtle. But at this moment, seeing the boy's somewhat pig-faced expression, the little creature in his arms suddenly became angry, and thick bolts of lightning flashed continuously in the empty room. It turned out that our Pikachu, after seeing his trainer in this state, was filled with jealousy. In order to get his trainer to see him again, he didn't care and just unleashed a 100,000-volt attack. At this moment, Xiaomao finally recovered from the joy of having drawn the starting Pokemon, Squirtle. Seeing Ash, charred and belching black smoke from being struck by Pikachu's 100,000-volt power, he snorted in dissatisfaction. "Hey Ash, you already have Pikachu, so why not stop being so indecisive? This Squirtle is mine, no one can take it away. Besides, I already have a starter Pokemon, so we can have a fight." "What? I'm just saying you'd be a little surprised to see the money, right? But if it comes to a fight, my Pikachu won't lose to your Squirtle." Ash defended himself, then grumbled in dissatisfaction. "Squirtle, I didn't expect it would be this little guy. This little guy has quite the talent." Professor Oak simply rubbed his chin in satisfaction, nodding inwardly. It seemed all this was fate. I'd assumed that Xiaomao would miss out on a promising starter Pokemon because of his decision to leave early, but it was all destined. Xiaomao is so lucky to get a starter Pokemon. This may be the legendary fool has good luck. Squirtle, this Pokemon is also quite talented. If it is trained well, it can even be compared to a quasi-god. Chen Kalen and Li Zuner were also discussing with each other at this time, and there was a hint of envy in their words. Chapter 784 Battle. Squirtle, the little turtle Pokemon. Its shell serves more than just protection. Its rounded shape and grooves reduce water resistance, allowing it to swim quickly. Someone suddenly spoke up, introducing Squirtle's information. Professor Oak's eyes lit up, and he laughed heartily. Very good, very good. That's exactly what I recorded about Squirtle in my Pokédex. It seems my Pokédex is at least useful after all. Alright. Xiaomao, since you already have a starting Pokemon, you can't change it from now on, no matter what. Professor Oak suddenly spoke, as if on cue. If you listen closely, you could even hear a faint warning. Yes, Grandpa, I know. From now on, Squirtle is my Pokemon, my first Pokemon. I'll give it up no matter what. On my future travels, wherever we go, I'll definitely take Squirtle with me. We're going to be the best duo and dominate the league championship. Well, it must be said, Young people are easily carried away by passion. They'd only exchanged a few words, and it would have been fine if they hadn't left the Pokemon battles, but they were actually scheming to win the Pokemon League Championship. Xiaomao, why are you getting so cocky again? I'll definitely be the one to win the League Championship. My future goal is to become a Pokemon Master. Collecting the 8 badges and challenging the League Championship is just the beginning. Xiaozhi then perfectly timed his rebuttal, his dissatisfaction undisguised. Come on, now that we both have our starter Pokemon, let's have a fight. I'll show you just how big the gap is between us. I'm the strongest. Raising his Pokeball, Xiaomao pointed the button side of the red and white Pokeball directly at Xiaozhi. As for why Xiaomao struck this pose, it was because he'd seen on TV that trainers in the Kalos region's battle castle would make this gesture whenever they battled, declaring war on their opponents. Xiaozhi, who usually watched less TV and more playing with Pokemon, simply blinked his eyes in a dazed way when he saw Xiaomao's pose. Confused, he couldn't understand Xiaomao's reasoning. While it looked cool, it was a bit redundant. Shouldn't Pokemon battles simply involve throwing the Pokeball? Although he was a little confused, it didn't dampen his enthusiasm in the slightest. He followed Xiaomao's example, executing the same exact movements. Then, under Xiaomao's guidance, the on-off button of his Pokeball touched the on-off button of Xiaozhi's. At that moment of contact, they both turned around in perfect unison and tossed their Pokeballs into the air. Although both trainers had already released their Pokemon and were just hanging around outside, this didn't stop the two passionate teenagers from carrying out their somewhat childish ritual. Just as the two Pokeballs were being tossed upwards by their trainers, and the Pokemon were poised to rush out to support their trainers, a pair of large hands suddenly appeared before everyone's eyes. They grew larger and larger before everyone's eyes, until they finally grasped the two Pokeballs, just as they were about to be tossed into the air and began to fall. After Xiaomao and Xiaozhi had finished throwing their Pokeballs, they both struck a very handsome pose. They waited for the Pokeballs they had thrown to be automatically retracted by the Pokeball belts tied to their waists. However, they were completely stunned while waiting. They exchanged puzzled glances, unable to understand why their Pokeballs hadn't been retracted by their belts yet. They felt a dark shadow loom over their heads, and when they looked up, they saw Professor Oak appear beside them. The Pokeball he was holding wasn't the Pokeball they had just thrown, so what else could it be? Professor Oak rolled his eyes in annoyance, glaring at the two passionate young men with a look of disappointment. Grandpa, what are you doing? I want to fight Xiaozhi to the death. Let him see how powerful I am. Yeah, Professor Oak, why are you stopping us? Let Xiaomao and I have a battle. Let him know that I, who aim to become a Pokemon Master, am not to be trifled with. Xiaozhi also shouted at this time. After hearing the shouting from both sides, Professor Oak became even more annoyed. Without intending to return the Pokeballs to each other, he simply knocked the two little heads with the knuckles of his fingers. What the hell are you two thinking, little brats? Pokemon battles aren't like that. And since you've already sent out your Pokemon, can you please stop going through all this hassle? It's making it really hard for me to find you for a battle. I'm just worried your Pokeballs might get thrown up and land on something I have lying around. That'd be terrible. Professor Oak said this seriously, imposing the tone of an elder admonishing his grandson. He paused, opening his eyes slightly to observe the two men's expressions. Besides, if you're going to have a Pokemon battle, why don't you do it in a proper Pokemon battle arena? And not on this little room of mine. If you break something, you can't afford to pay for it. Besides my Pokemon, there are other trainers' Pokemon here too. If you break all their Pokeballs, you too will know what it's like to be beaten. Chapter 785 Serving as Referee. If you destroy all those Pokeballs, you too will know what it's like to be beaten to pulp. As Professor Oak spoke, he couldn't help but imagine his grandson and his two grandsons being chased and beaten by a crowd, a sly, gloating grin spreading across his face. Besides, why did you have to duel here? Are you so impatient? The open space outside and the hills behind are more than enough for you two to mess around with. But then again, if you make too much noise and break some plants, that would be terrible. At first, Satoshi and Shigeki felt a little embarrassed by Professor Oak's words. They blushed and lowered their heads, looking like they were admitting their mistakes. After all, just as Professor Oak had said, they were so excited that they had almost forgotten themselves. They were in the most secretive part of Oak Research Institute. If they started fighting without any regard for others, it would be disastrous. But the more they listened, the more furrows formed on Ash and Shiro's foreheads, until everyone present began to tune out Professor Oak's incessant chatter. Shiro, let's go to the backyard and have a Pokemon battle. This time, I'm going to make you snort and kneel down and call me Big Brother. After Ash completely tuned out Professor Oak's words, his hot-blooded, Chuonibiawa resurfaced. Not only that, but his words were the most arrogant ever. Come on, who's afraid of who? Squirtle is afraid of the hammer, Shiro roared back in disbelief. This only troubled Squirtle, who was standing beside him. Upon hearing his master's roar, he immediately let out a look of grievance. Did he offend his master? Why did he say such things? He was really afraid of the hammer, okay? After all, a hammer hitting his shell hurts, it hurts. Even if he'd used a little more force, it would have left marks on his hard shell. But Squirtle didn't have time to dwell on it. He felt his body lighten, still lost in his thoughts. When he came to, he found himself being carried out of the room filled with red and white Pokeballs by his trainer. Suddenly, everyone was gathered in an open space behind Professor Oak's laboratory. Okay, we've decided on this place. It's very spacious and great. I must be using it with Pikachu and the others. After taking in the surroundings, Ash finally nodded in satisfaction. So what are we waiting for? Let's begin the battle. Don't cry when the loser does. Don't worry, you'll be the one crying, it's you. I'll beat you up real bad. Nonsense. It's obviously you. I'll beat you up real bad, it's you. Watching the two men locked in an endless cycle of bickering, the onlookers couldn't help but sigh, feeling helpless and powerless. Were these two just natural enemies? It had only been a short while, and they were arguing again. This time, however, it wasn't Professor Oak who stepped in to mediate, but Chen Kalin, arguably the oldest and most powerful of the children. It's true, even though Chen Kalin had only been with Professor Oak for a short time, she still held the highest prestige among the children, no matter where they were. So, without beating around the bush, she immediately called for a halt. I'm telling you two to shut up for a minute. Aren't we going to have a Pokemon battle? Then hurry up and start. Seriously, don't you know how much power it takes to have the backlights on just for you guys to battle? Hurry up and finish this, call it a day. Then we can all go home and see our moms. And get some sleep, okay? As Chen Kalin's scolding faded, the previously tumultuous scene suddenly quieted to a pin drop. Clap, 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 and just then, a sudden burst of applause erupted. Professor Oak once again took center stage tonight, seemingly in sync with the master of the Research Institute. With every movement Professor Oak made, the light he shone upon shifted with him. Alright, both of you, calm down. Kalin's right. If the fight's over soon, shouldn't you be able to play with your Pokemon sooner? But you two, Satoshi and Momo, just challenging each other like this won't do. A Pokemon battle like this requires a referee, a Pokemon referee, Momo and Satoshi screamed in unison. That's right, a Pokemon referee, Grandpa, we know about Pokemon referees, but we don't have any among us. Where are we going to find one? Yeah, Professor Oak, for a battle like this between rookie trainers, there's no need for a referee. Honestly, it's a bit of a waste. So embarrassing, Satoshi spoke up at the perfect time, following Momo's words. Tisk tisk, a strange sigh escaped his lips, and Professor Oak raised his index finger and waved it in front of everyone, looking quite impressive. But that's not the point. Seeing everyone's gaze once again fixed on him, he no longer held the air of a renowned Pokemon researcher. Instead, he acted like a newcomer making his debut. He said sheepishly, ahem. Excuse me, I'm a former official Pokemon referee for the league. This time, I'll be the referee for your Pokemon battles. Despite his sheepish expression, his words lacked any trace of embarrassment. Instead, they tinged with a subtle smugness that made those uninformed grit their teeth. Chapter 786 Dragonite. In that case, I'll leave the refereeing to Professor Oak. Xiaomao, let's finish the fight we agreed to. I'd love to, but don't deny if you lose. Tisk, I won't lose. This fight between us must come to an end. Clearly, Professor Oak's desired praise and admiration weren't met with the kind of praise and admiration he'd hoped for. Xiaomao and Xiaozhi, after exchanging a few pleasantries, simply ignored Professor Oak. Professor Oak, being ignored, certainly wouldn't accept such a refusal. He's a man who values dignity. Ahem, Could you please listen to me for a second? I haven't even finished what I wanted to say. However, Xiaozhi and Xiaomao, still in their rage, acted as if they hadn't heard Professor Oak's sudden interruption. Instinctively, they all roared in unison, heading directly towards the source of Professor Oak's voice. "Shut up. You have no right to interrupt us." Pulling the corners of his twitching mouth, he tried his best to suppress his rage. But this suppression was painful. The corners of his mouth constantly tugged at the edge of their lips, wanting to smile but not wanting to, and his awkward expression made it even more eerie. Oh no. Professor Oak is about to lose his temper. "Kalen, Zuner, you two, quickly retreat with me, or we'll be caught in the crossfire." Hanako, who had also been watching the scene with great interest, couldn't help but cry out in surprise, quickly grabbing Li Zuner and Chen Kalen standing to her left and right. Chen Kalen and Li Zuner had been visiting Professor Oak for some time, and as Hanako's close neighbor, they were quite familiar with each other. Therefore, facing Hanako's sudden attack, they were not afraid. The two women didn't instinctively resist or try to push Hanako back. Instead, they let Hanako lead them by the hand and began to move backward. Unbeknownst to Li Zuner and Chen Kalen, in the brief moment between Hanako's hand reaching out to the two women and their slight reaction, a glint of light suddenly flashed in Hanako's eyes. It was only a fleeting moment, and with Hanako's pull, the three of them quickly retreated to a seemingly safer area. "Auntie Hanako, what's going on? Why did you suddenly ask us to move apart? And what about Professor Oak's outburst you mentioned? Isn't he always so kind?" Li Zuner was the first to ask, unable to contain her curiosity. Even as she asked, she couldn't help but recall the moments they had spent together. Back then, Professor Oak had been so kind. Even when the two of them had done something inappropriate out of ignorance, he hadn't gotten angry, but instead comforted them. Chen Kalen also looked at Hanako with some confusion, hoping he could give them a convincing reason. However, Hanako remained silent, holding his index finger to his lips with a mysterious smile. Seeing Hanako's silence, Li Zuner and Chen Kalen stopped being bored and obediently watched the unfolding situation. However, the more they watched, the wider their eyes grew, their mouths almost forming an O shape. At first glance, it looked like a Pokeball could fit in without a problem. As for what they had witnessed that had caused such a startling expression, let's turn our attention to the bustling arena. After being ignored, he was then scolded by two young men, his grandchildren. Professor Oak was now somewhat embarrassed. Although he was usually a very amiable person, he still had to save face. This was truly a case of going all out. No. They just got their starter Pokemon, and they're already yelling at me like that. What if they make it to the regional Pokemon League tournament? They'll beat me up, and I'll be beaten to pulp. No. I have to find a chance to strike back. While they're still a little bit strong, I have to curb their bad tempers and make them change. With that thought, Professor Oak suddenly felt relieved. A kind smile returned to his face, and with that expression, he grasped a red and white Pokeball. "Old friend, I'll ask you once again to come out and teach these ignorant little creatures a lesson. Let them know how cruel the world truly is. Being a Pokemon trainer, especially a qualified one, isn't easy." Professor Oak muttered to himself as he tossed the Pokeball into the air, drawing a graceful parabola in the darkness. A red light burst from the Pokeball, standing out against the darkness. As the red light rose, a brand new Pokemon appeared before everyone's eyes. Its body was orange-yellow, with large, gray eyes, a rounded muzzle, and small nostrils. Two long, thin antennae and a small horn adorned its head. Its striped, cream-colored abdomen extended to the tip of its long tail. Its sturdy limbs each ended in 3 claws. Its legs are clearly defined where they meet its body, but its arms are smooth where they meet its body. Its wings are small compared to its body and covered with membranes. Don't be fooled by this Pokemon's unassuming appearance, even a bit chubby and silly. But it's actually quite remarkable, a near-legendary beast, legendary in the Kanto region. What other Pokemon could it be but Dragonite? As soon as it appeared, an invisible aura emanated from Dragonite, centered around it. The surrounding plants seemed overwhelmed by the aura, swaying and bowing. As if this wasn't enough, Dragonite immediately released a powerful and terrifying aura and unleashed a deafening dragon roar. Chapter 787 Dragonite's Interference. Hurry, dragon roars echoed, piercing the heavens. The pitch-black night seemed to slowly spread outwards, bringing light that had been delayed for a long time. The sound waves, combined with the unwavering momentum of the dragon's roar, created a wave of sound that was both faint and real, spreading outwards like ripples. Wow, what's this Pokemon? It's so handsome. This, isn't it Grandpa's Pokemon, Dragonite? How did it appear here? The sudden change in the scene immediately caught the attention of Xiaomao and Xiaozhi, who were still arguing. However, as Professor Oak's grandson, Xiaomao recognized the Dragonite immediately. Wasn't it his grandfather's Pokemon? However, before Xiaozhi and Xiaomao could recover from Dragonite's imposing aura, they saw Dragonite making its next move. Even though Dragonite no longer possessed the ferocity of its youth, Yue remained a force no Pokemon dared to challenge. And though Dragonite was aging, their long-standing partnership had forged a close rapport between them and Professor Oak. Even though Professor David had merely released it and spoken a few words without issuing any commands, Dragonite still moved. Is this the Dragonite, known as the quasi-god of Kanto, Dragonite, a dragon Pokemon? It can orbit the Earth once in 16 hours. If it finds a ship in distress in a storm, it guides it to land. Chen Kalen and Li Zuner, watching from afar, finally came to their senses. Having studied under Professor Oak for a while, they instinctively recalled the introduction to Dragonite that Professor Oak had given him back home when he compiled it into the Pacts. However, the Pacts contained far more information about Dragonite than that. Even in the stormiest seas, it flies calmly. Captains who have witnessed its presence call it the embodiment of the sea. Such a description is enough to prove Dragonite's remarkable nature. Setting aside the information contained in the Pokemon Encyclopedia, even the first mention of Dragonite is clear. Dragonite's name is simply because of its speed. In the Kanto region, when people think of the fastest Pokemon, they instinctively think of Pidgeot, boasting a Mach 2 flight speed. However, little do they know that there are always higher mountains than mountains. Dragonite's speed far exceeds people's imagination. It can circle the Earth in just 16 hours, just imagine how fast that is. At full speed, it could practically leave other Pokemon behind. Even though Dragonite is now old and no longer as energetic as it was in its youth, its speed is still impressive for Squirtle and Pikachu, two relatively new Pokemon. It was already terrifying, even unforgettable. Before the two Pokemon could react, Dragonite had already swiftly flown in front of them. Without any unnecessary movement or use of any skills, simply flapping its tiny pair of wings with all its might, the resulting gust of wind was too much for the two Pokemon to withstand. They were all toppled over. Pikachu was relatively easy to deal with. Having hatched long ago and already possessing considerable combat power, Pikachu made good use of its small size, struggling to withstand the strong wind. But Squirtle wasn't so relaxed. Having only just hatched from its egg, it naturally tucked its limbs, head, and tail into place to defend itself against such a strong wind. But Squirtle didn't do that. Fortunately, if it had, it would have completely lost its balance. Under the powerful force of Dragonite's wings, Squirtle's shell, like a ball being slapped away, began to spin on the ground before suddenly leaping to the side. After all, Squirtle was still too young, far from the solidity and strength of Blastoise's final evolution. Fortunately, Mo was quick-witted and leaped high into the air, blocking the Squirtle's shell with a powerful shot. Hey, Grandpa, this is so unfair. How can you send Dragonite to attack Squirtle? What about them? You know, Squirtle and Pikachu are barely starting out as starter Pokemon. How can they possibly stand up to a veteran like you, while Squirtle and Pikachu are already daunted by Dragonite? Their trainers, Mo and Satoshi, showed no fear. They were very effective. Xiaomao roared in great displeasure at that time, and veins could be seen faintly throbbing on his ferocious face. However, at this time, Professor Oak didn't know whether he was desperate or he was really desperate. He actually followed his grandson and his friends in playing tricks. At this time, Professor Oak still looked like the kind of old grandfather before. But in fact, his actions and subsequent words completely broke his personality. But it was okay, because the people around him were all his own people, and he didn't have to worry about his bad image spreading. After all, his previous image had been ruined by his grandson, so it wouldn't matter if he did this trick now. Dr. Oak scratched his ears and faced the angry retort from his grandson without seeming to care at all. How can you say I committed a foul? I clearly didn't commit any fouls, okay? If you insist on saying I committed a foul, then you also committed a foul, okay? Nonsense, how did we commit a foul? Besides, Professor Oak, you look like a referee in the jungle, not here to pick a fight with us, right? I've never heard of a referee suddenly challenging two trainers in a battle, okay. Chapter 788, Professor Oak's Strangeness. It's true you haven't heard of it before, but from this moment on, haven't you heard of it? Seriously, why are you making such a fuss? Calm down, youngsters. Being flustered and impulsive isn't the proper role of a good Pokemon trainer. Professor Oak remained unfazed, even lecturing the two once more. Okay, that might be off the table, but isn't it unfair for you to send such a powerful Dragonite to fight us? Satoshi was also feeling a bit unconvinced. In his view, Pokemon battles should be fair and square, without any underhanded tactics. Not only that, the Pokemon on both sides should also be of similar levels, ideally, the same. However, after hearing Satoshi's question and answer, Professor Oak couldn't hide the smile that spread across his face. He'd been fooled. He'd waited all this time for this moment, for someone to question him. Xiaozhi, I know you're very innocent and passionate about Pokemon, but that's far from enough to become a great Pokemon trainer. The strong prey on the weak, the fittest survive, the unfit are eliminated. The law of the jungle has been unchanged since ancient times. This world is far more cruel than you can imagine. There is no such thing as absolute fairness in this world. The only way to achieve it is to fight for it with your own strength. As he said this, the kind look in Professor Oak's eyes disappeared. Instead, a cold, sharp, even irritable emotion was hidden in them. And I think this is quite fair. After all, Dragonite may be powerful, but you're 2 against 1, okay? If you can't even beat 2 against 1, then forget about becoming a Pokemon Master. You're not even worthy of that right now. At least until you've fully grown up, learn to be patient and patient. Don't be too flamboyant, or I doubt you'll even know how you died. Professor Oak's initial words came off as a joke, but his subsequent remarks were direct, without the slightest hint of evasion. His tone sent chills down the spines of everyone present, a look of fear on their faces. Even Lizuner and Chen Kalin, who had always been relatively mature and, having inherited the family business early on, had already witnessed the cruel, dirty, and dark side of things, couldn't help but tremble. Is this still the same affable Professor Oak? Why does he feel like a completely different person? Yes. Especially now, the aura he exudes is icy. After all this time, I've only ever felt this level of combat power since my grandfather's generation. Sister Kalin, that's not all. Did you notice how incredibly powerful the Dragonite is? If I'm not mistaken, it's only slightly weaker than Grandpa's Thunder God. And the reason for that slight difference is that Thunder God is a mythical beast, giving him a slight advantage. Lizuner's voice trembled as she spoke. Is this the hidden friend Master mentioned? He's truly hidden, and I never really noticed. A wry smile played on her lips. Chen Kalin couldn't help but recall the night they'd arrived. Zhao Kuang, who had recommended them to study with Professor Oak, had warned them not to underestimate him. Professor Oak was not only a renowned researcher, but also a formidable Pokemon trainer. His years of research and understanding of Pokemon had made him a formidable Pokemon breeder and breeder. These various peaks of excellence were perfectly combined in Professor Oak alone. Lizuner then recalled Zhao Kuang's instructions to them upon their arrival. It was precisely because of Zhao Kuang's instructions that Lizuner and Chen Kalin had treated Professor Oak with the utmost respect upon their arrival. This respect had even transformed into genuine respect. This shift was due to Professor Oak's knowledge of Pokemon and his dedication to them. I had thought I had previously overestimated Professor Oak, but now, I finally discovered how unfathomable he still is. Within this unfathomable depth lies a mixture of fear and curiosity. I didn't expect Professor Oak to be so powerful. Just from the aura emanating from this Dragonite, it's clear he must have been a prominent figure in his youth, a child of destiny. Chen Kalin couldn't help but sigh. You're right. Professor Oak was indeed a prominent figure in his youth, an idol to many. It was because of Professor Oak that I first embarked on my journey of training and travel, becoming a Pokemon trainer. That's how I met Satoshi's father, fell in love, and gave birth to Satoshi. Hanako, who hadn't been born for a long time, also sighed in emotion upon hearing Chen Kalin's sentiments about Professor Oak. Looking at the figure in a white coat, his hair slightly graying, a slightly older but still upright figure, a dazed look appeared in her eyes, like a little girl meeting her idol. Auntie Hanako, can you tell us more about Professor Oak's past deeds? We are also very curious about Professor Oak's past deeds. Hanako's sudden words made Chen Kalin, who was originally a little moved by the powerful strength displayed by Professor Oak, move. At this moment, her expression could not help but move, and she asked Hanako. As if she had already guessed that Chen Kalin or Lizuner would ask, there was no surprise on Hanako's face. She just silently took out something from her body. Lizuner and Chen Kalin took a closer look. Isn't it just a shrunken Pokeball? However, this Pokeball has now been made into an exquisite necklace ornament. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 789 The Battle Begins. I can't tell you too much about Professor Oak. If you really want to know, ask someone else, or even Professor Oak himself. Hanako was lost in thought, staring at the Pokemon necklace in her hand, but she didn't forget the two people standing nearby, curiously watching her question. We just want to get a rough idea of Professor Oak's time. It's nothing serious, right? Yes. We still want to know a little about Professor Oak's affairs. It doesn't need to be too detailed, just a rough outline will do. Chen Kalin and Lizuner didn't push any further. After hearing Hanako's answer, they nodded in agreement. I can only say that Professor Oak's current sight is entirely due to Pokemon. A Pokemon? What kind of Pokemon could cause such a change in Professor Oak? Lizuner pressed on, fearing that if they didn't get to the point, Hanako would stop answering their questions. However, Lizuner's worries proved unnecessary. Hanako answered without hesitation. What kind of Pokemon was it? Let me think. It looked like a Lizard King. It happened so long ago, and I was still young, so I don't remember much, but I do remember the general events clearly. Hanako now began to recall the events surrounding Professor Oak's time. Lizard King? The final evolved form of Atako, one of the Hoenn region's 3 starter Pokemon? Yes, Atako's final form. So what happened next? What happened? Why haven't I seen Lizard King? Logically, as one of the Hoenn region's 3 starter Pokemon, Lizard King's final evolved form should have immense potential and talent. Since Professor Oak was able to raise Dragonite to such terrifying power, I'm sure Atako's strength shouldn't be much worse. At the very least, it should be only slightly weaker than Dragonite, or perhaps even stronger. If I'm not mistaken, Atako should be Professor Oak's starter Pokemon. So its strength shouldn't be much worse. But why haven't I seen Professor Oak release Lizard King? Lizuner was completely incarnated at this moment, a million questions gushing out of her mouth like a machine gun. That's because Lizard King is dead. As Hanako spoke these words, her face was expressionless. Yet, anyone could hear the tremor in her voice. After all, if you carefully consider, if Professor Oak was home and not traveling, his neighbor, Hanako, would often visit. Furthermore, his Pokemon, mostly Bimbisara and Dratini, would be the ones playing with him. One can only imagine how heartbroken Hanako must have been when she heard of Lizard King's death. Lizuner and Chen Kalin were stunned by the news, as if struck by a bolt from the blue. Dead. Lizuner's voice trembled slightly as she asked in disbelief. Chen Kalin was equally hesitant. Although they had encountered a wide variety of Pokemon and encountered a variety of things in their city, their death was still deeply moving. Then I just hope how he died. After all, according to my previous analysis, the Lizard King should be quite powerful, right? Yes, the Lizard King was indeed powerful back then. But that very fact also gave Professor Oak immense confidence, leading to him being just like those 2 boys before him, confident, even conceited. Because of this personality, Professor Oak encountered many difficulties. However, in one incident, the Lizard King sacrificed himself to save him. Hanako was also feeling a sense of emotion, watching her sons, still arguing with their rivals. Her eyes were filled with a complex expression. After all, seeing Xiaozhi and Xiaoguang now was like seeing Professor Oak in his past. She didn't want these 2 children to follow in Professor Oak's footsteps again. Honestly, that feeling was truly unbearable. This indirectly led to the inconsistency of the barrage. The then unrivaled Kanto Regional Champion League investigator returned to Pallet Town and began researching Pokemon. After hearing Hanako's brief account, Chen Kalin and Lizuner were left with only one thought: holy crap. Boss. This is the real hidden boss. Even though they still didn't quite understand the impressive titles he just tossed around, they felt incredibly impressive. The two women's eyes changed completely when they looked at Professor Oak. Stars filled their eyes. It turned out they truly had a hidden boss around them. Unlike the admiration they felt for their grandfather, this truly held real meaning for an outsider like Professor Oak. However, as the three of them were conversing, the situation shifted once again. After receiving a profound lesson from Professor Oak and Dragonite, Xiaomao and Xiaozhi had finally learned their lesson. Instead of continuing the argument, they once again asked Professor Oak to referee. Dragonite, on the other hand, watched from the air as the two Pokémon battled, wondering if there was any cheating. Now, let's begin the Pokémon battle between rookie trainers Ash and Sean. Each can only send out one Pokémon. When one Pokémon loses its ability to fight, the other wins. Professor Oak read out the rules for the same outdoor battle. However, after hearing Professor Oak's words, both Ash and Satoshi automatically blocked out some of Professor Oak's unkind words. Now, are you all ready? Dragonite will be the referee for this match. I hope both of you new trainers perform well. Chapter 790 Pikachu vs Squirtle. So, do you both have any questions now? Professor Oak asked, looking at Shiro and Satoshi, who were standing on opposite sides in a standoff. No, understood, let's get started. I can't wait, even Pikachu is eager, too. Shiro and Satoshi were both filled with excitement for this battle. In every sense of the word, this was their first Pokémon battle, and the first Pokémon battle between two rivals. Okay, since both sides have no questions, the match will begin. Please choose the first attack position. First attack position, what is that? At this moment, Satoshi's eyes, which had been full of fighting spirit, suddenly turned into small eyes, blinking at Professor Oak and Shiro across from him. Oh, Professor Oak, Shiro, and the people watching were speechless. Lee Zuner and Chen Kalen exchanged imperceptible glances at Hanako, who stood between them, acting as if nothing had happened. Is Xiaozhi so clueless? He doesn't even know the most basic rules of Pokémon battles. It's amazing he loves Pokémon so much. It's truly embarrassing, isn't that so? The two quietly put their heads together, whispering quietly, as if afraid to be overheard. Just then, Hanako, who had been silent for so long, spoke again, wondering if their previous conversation had been overheard. It's none of my business. After all, my son is just like that. His love for Pokémon is unparalleled, but when it comes to learning, he's a complete novice. He won't study hard even when asked. But I believe that child will achieve even greater success with his style. Chen Kalen and Lee Zuner shuddered, too frightened to say a word, pretending not to hear. The two had separated once again, carefully observing the unfolding situation. Lee Zuner and Chen Kalen were truly afraid to speak for a moment. Just from their brief encounter with the group, they felt they had gained more from this brief time than from their previous interactions with Hanako. Don't mess with them. These are all hidden masters. Hanako's words suggested she was likely a person with a hidden agenda and a rich history. They didn't want to provoke Hanako right now. If she got angry and killed them all, that would be disastrous. Before they could fully mature, they were still developing slowly. It was better to stay low. Xiaomao was speechless, but eager to get started. She patiently explained the rules of Pokémon battles to Xiaozhi. So, Ash, now you understand, right? If there's anything else you don't understand, ask quickly. Pokémon battles don't wait. Oh, I see. I see. As for the rest of the questions, I'll ask you when I remember them. Though a little confused, Ash understood somewhat, so it wasn't as if he hadn't taken it all in. Xiaomao couldn't help but twitch twice. He resisted the urge to charge at Ash and engage him in a close combat, instead venting his anger on the grass, stomping on it twice. Then let's decide on the attack position now. Seeing that time was almost up, Professor Oak immediately pulled a Pokémon League coin from his white coat. He glanced at both Ash and Xiaomao. Xiaomao immediately understood and blurted out without hesitation, then I'll choose heads. Huh? Xiaomao actually chose heads? That's what I was planning on choosing. In that case, I'll choose tails. After a brief hesitation, Xiaozhi finally managed to get his act together. Professor Oak tossed the Pokémon League coin into the air. The glittering golden coin shone dazzlingly under the lights of the Oak Laboratory. The League coin spun in the air with a beautiful, graceful movement. Professor Oak then swiftly snatched the coin into his hand. As Xiaomao and Xiaozhi watched each other anxiously, Professor Oak slowly moved his hand away, revealing the truth inside. It's tails. So Xiaozhi will attack first. Yeah, great. Xiaomao, you see? I'll take the first attack position, Xiaozhi shouted excitedly, but without losing sight of the main task, he waved his hand with a flourish, displaying a spirited demeanor. Pikachu, go ahead. Get ready for battle. Pika. Though it was his first time being commanded into battle, Pikachu was incredibly obedient. Upon receiving Ash's order, he immediately tossed down his uneaten food. Of course, Pikachu, a good Pokemon who understood the value of hard work, wouldn't waste uneaten food. So, after carefully finding a clean spot and carefully placing the Pokemon food on the ground, Pikachu instantly gathered his speed, sprinting away and leaping into the arena. Tisk, what's the point of getting the first attack? The ultimate victory still belongs to me, Xiaomao, he retorted dismissively. Unwilling to be outdone, he threw the Pokeball that Squirtle had retracted into its Pokeball just for the fight. Come out and get ready for battle, my dear. Suddenly, Squirtle reappeared in everyone's sight. Now that both trainers are ready, let's officially begin. Professor Oak, the referee, had barely finished his words when Ash began to eagerly bark orders at Pikachu. After all, while he had named Pokemon before, none of those times had ever been as exciting as commanding his own Pokemon this time. Pikachu, use Flash. Squirtle, the opponent is coming. We use Impact. Pikachu Squirtle. After receiving the orders from their respective trainers, the two Pokemon immediately unleashed their abilities without hesitation, even though this was only their first time coordinating with each other. Chapter 791 Pikachu vs Squirtle. Pikachu Squirtle. Upon receiving their trainer's command, the two Pokemon unleashed their abilities without hesitation, even though this was their first time coordinating. Pikachu, a Pokemon renowned for its speed and agility, unleashed its short limbs, sprinting at full speed. Combined with its nimble form, it quickly reached Squirtle. However, Squirtle, worthy of its title as one of the starter Pokemon, showed no fear at all when seeing Pikachu charging at him at breakneck speed. Instead, it displayed the courage of a newborn calf, a faint white glow emanating from its bald head. It charged towards Pikachu, who was charging towards it with lightning flash. Bang! A low, crashing sound could be heard as the two Pokemon clashed for the first time. However, Pikachu was, after all, slightly larger due to his age, and his strength and level were also slightly higher. Squirtle only held out for a moment before being sent flying backwards. Fortunately, Squirtle was quick to react, instantly retreating into his shell as a defensive move. That's great, Pikachu. Use Flash again, that's what Squirtle does. Stay in your shell and don't come out and use Retract. Facing Satoshi's aggressive pursuit, Xiaomao lived up to his reputation as Professor Oak's grandson. He remained calm and composed in his command, issuing orders with a composed demeanor. Professor Oak, acting as referee and observing the entire situation, couldn't help but nod his head. Not bad, not bad. These two children truly have great potential. Satoshi's ability to assess the situation and seize the opportunity was truly remarkable. But Xiaomao wasn't bad either. He made full use of his strengths and wasn't so rigid in his fighting style. He immediately issued a command the moment Squirtle was sent flying, which was quite a quick reaction. As expected, as Professor Oak's thoughts turned, the situation on the field began to shift. Squirtle, having used his possible skill to boost his defense, withstood Pikachu's swift attacks again and again, remaining unscathed. Of course, aside from a few dizzy spells from the constant jolts from the impact, everything else was fine. Damn it! Why are Pikachu's attacks suddenly so much less effective? Even then, Xiaozhi remained oblivious. While he might possess a unique talent for Pokemon battles, without a comprehensive understanding of Pokemon knowledge, all this would be useless. Only with ample Pokemon knowledge can one be fully prepared for the various emergencies that lie ahead. Combined with ingenious ideas, a perfect Pokemon battle can be forged. Professor Oak had already formed a preliminary assessment of the villains currently fighting. While Xiaomao possessed a sufficient supply of Pokemon and extensive on-the-spot command experience, his overall flexibility was still severely lacking. While Xiaozhi was quite adaptable, often even finding creative solutions in critical situations, his lack of practical experience and a lack of solid Pokemon theoretical knowledge ultimately meant he could only rely on sudden, miraculous bursts of power to achieve victory. Overall, these two little creatures were equally matched, their strengths and weaknesses complementing each other. Overall, however, both possessed immense potential, and their futures were limitless. The battle continued unabated. While neither Pokémon was particularly high level, it was precisely this that made for a lively and evenly matched encounter. If both sides weren't equally powerful, fighting would be pointless. Just sitting there until the end of the year, where would the fun in fighting be? Squirtle once again, relying on the defense boosted by talking and fighting, Pikachu withstood the blow. With a flash of lightning, Squirtle quickly adjusted, landing safely after being sent flying. Trainer Xiaomao was even more quick on his phone. Just as Tenrikatsu had landed, his command arrived. Squirtle, use water gun. Faced with Squirtle's sudden shift from defense to offense, Pikachu had no time to resist, and Ash hadn't given the order either. Consequently, Pikachu, which had been charging forward, was directly sent flying by the water gun. I'm calling a foul, that's it. Facing Ash's yelling, Xiaomao acted unfazed, saying in its sundear tone, it's not a foul, it's not a foul. We didn't say hand-to-hand combat. This is a Pokemon battle. You're competing with your wits and your Pokemon's perseverance, okay? At this point, Ash fell silent. His self-control was so limited that he could only glare at him angrily, searching his mind for Pikachu's moves. Fortunately, while Ash didn't have much knowledge of Pokemon, he'd often watched Pokemon battle variety shows, so even with his limited memory, he'd made a few mistakes. But Xiaomao wasn't going to give Ash any chance. Seeing the right moment, he immediately gave the order. Squirtle, use Bubble Beam. Pikachu, use Thunderbolt. Facing a barrage of bubble attacks from Squirtle, Pikachu's movements were incredibly agile, dodging the barrage with just a few deft movements. Seeing Pikachu successfully dodge the bubble beams, just as he'd imagined, this undoubtedly helped and encouraged Ash's plans. The smile on his face deepened. Great, everything's just as I planned. Next, Pikachu, use Sand Kick. Then, Thunderbolt. Pikachu's reaction speed was also incredibly fast. The moment he received the trainer's order, he immediately changed his skills, his forward momentum coming to a screeching halt. Chapter 792 Pikachu vs Squirtle. Pikachu, just as Pikachu, using its nimble form and swift speed to dodge Squirtle's attack, before Squirtle could fully react, Pikachu had instantly landed beside Squirtle. Under Squirtle's stunned gaze, Pikachu didn't launch his lightning-fast attack as before, but instead unleashed a sand kick. Although the battle was taking place on a grassy field, covered in soft, pliable grass, the sand kick still managed to kick up a bit of dust. Adding to the darkness, the dust swirled around, obscuring Squirtle's vision. Damn. I didn't expect you to use that kind of trick, Ash. You've changed. You're no longer the simple, straightforward Ash I knew. Seeing this, Xiaomao's face changed, and he couldn't help but taunt Ash. Xiaomao didn't dare to delay for a moment and immediately issued an order. Squirtle, use your shell and hide. I've been waiting for this moment. Pikachu, don't hold back. Use your electric attack. Suddenly, a flash of golden lightning pierced through the darkness and dust of the battlefield, piercing the layers of obstruction, dazzling everyone. What? Without giving Xiaomao any chance to be surprised, Pikachu swiftly unleashed his electric attack, accurately hitting the motionless Squirtle. Squirtle, Squirtle, Squirtle's scream of pain echoed through the dust. Xiaomao's face turned grim. Although the dust obscured the situation, it was obvious that Squirtle was in a very bad situation. After all, electricity counters water, and electricity hitting a water-type Squirtle would cause significant damage. Wow, it seems Xiaozhi isn't so simple after all. He's really quite resourceful, quite surprising indeed. Watching from afar, Lizuner gasped in surprise, her beautiful eyes flickering with surprise. Indeed, it's true. From the previous head-on collision to now being able to cleverly apply it. His own Pokemon attributes have given him the upper hand. While they're very basic and the most common, they're undeniably very useful. Chen Kalen nodded, clearly agreeing with Lizuner. Of course. Don't you see whose son Xiaozhi is? Hanako, who had been eavesdropping on the two women's conversation, interjected with a fitting remark, her words brimming with pride. A face that, despite the passage of time, hadn't aged at all, but had instead grown younger, was radiating pride. After all, Ash might have some knowledge of other Pokemon lore, but having watched Pokemon battle shows for years, he certainly has a good understanding of Pokemon attribute counteractions. Hanako clearly agreed with the two women's words, and her comments further confirmed this fact. However, What Hanako didn't know was that despite constantly watching Pokemon battle-related shows, Ash still didn't fully understand the issue of Pokemon attribute counteractions. After all, who are we? Why would we need to use our brains? Just a quick word would solve the problem. But no, isn't there still Pikachu's clever little brain to help his trainer through difficult situations? After all, the idea of flexibly applying Pokemon knowledge in battles was still a bit far-fetched and impractical for Ash right now. Ash's current fighting style was primarily based on courage, relying solely on passion and momentum to overcome danger. Once that momentum faded, Ash was on the verge of defeat. But perhaps this wasn't a problem for Ash at all. His passion for battling Pokemon was so intense, like a perpetual motion machine, never stopping. This was very similar to Yu's style, each one was a template for a battle maniac. Beyond this, Ash's Pokemon battles were largely based on his Pokemon and their words of encouragement. He allowed them to unleash their potential, securing victory for both his trainer and themselves. The series of tactics Ash had just ordered were merely a flash of inspiration. He'd completely forgotten that Pikachu was an electric type counter to Squirtle, a water type. It was simply because he'd seen a trainer on a Pokemon show give his Pikachu a command with a shock and sand kick as one of its skills. Perhaps it was also because he was a child of good fortune, possessed by the protagonist template, that Ash had accidentally struck upon his opponent's weak spot. At this point, one wondered if even the heavens couldn't bear the loneliness, eager to know the outcome of the battle. A cool evening breeze blew gently, dispersing the dust from the sandstorm on the battlefield, revealing its true form. Squirtle, no longer tucked in, was now fully exposed, its limbs, head, and tail fully exposed. A hint of pain still hung on its face, but it didn't seem to have lost its fighting ability. This showed that Squirtle was quite capable, having taken such a powerful blow. Its electric attack had surprisingly withstood. Similarly, from another perspective, the levels of these two Pokemon weren't particularly high. Squirtle and Pikachu aren't both very high level, which makes a fight like this interesting. Let's see how much potential you two little ones have, and how many eye-catching battles you can unleash. Professor Oak remained silent. Given their young age, the two little creatures even felt a hint of real rage. Damn it, Squirtle, don't give up. Use your water gun to attack, Xiaomao, it's useless. I just remembered that your Squirtle seems to be restrained by my Pikachu. I advise you to admit defeat obediently. Then I can reluctantly accept you as my little brother. All you have to do is call me Big Brother. Chapter 793 Pikachu vs Squirtle. I advise you to just admit defeat. Then I can reluctantly take you in as my younger brother. All you have to do is call me Big Brother. As Xiaozhi said this, he held his head high like a victorious turkey. It was unclear if he was hallucinating. They could even vaguely see the nose on Xiaozhi's raised head suddenly grow longer and longer. Damn it. A gentleman can be killed but not humiliated, Xiaomao roared angrily, as if he was about to lose his mind. Xiaozhi looked so utterly deserving of a beating, wasn't he? Squirtle, go on, hit him hard, Xiaomao roared again and again. It seems you still refuse to give up. In that case, Pikachu, let's keep going. Use shock, as if he'd found a surefire way to victory. Ash's face was filled with boundless excitement. He pointed at Squirtle and Momo across from him, roaring furiously. Pikachu, it was as if even the Pokemon were influenced by their trainer's emotions, roaring furiously as well. But cute creatures are still cute, no matter how furious their roars. It still felt a bit disorienting, especially with that fierce-looking face. Some girls couldn't help but want to hug her. Lee Zuner, watching from a distance, was already clutching her cheeks, exclaiming in surprise. If it weren't for Chen Kalen holding him tightly, she'd have rushed forward. Wow. Pikachu is so adorable. I can't handle it. Sister Kalen, why are you grabbing us? Hurry up and pick up Pikachu. Let's play with it. It's so adorable. Chen Kalen couldn't help but break into a cold sweat as she heard her best friend and sister's incessant, almost infatuated chatter. A bead of sweat rolled down her cheek. I thought Zuner was just simply infatuated with cute Pokemon, but I didn't expect it to reach this point. This is really advanced. If the Pokemon League battle came up, and the opposing team sent out a cuter, more adorable Pokemon, Zuner would have to surrender immediately, rushing into the field to embrace the opponent's adorable Pokemon and receiving a yellow card warning from the referee. I thought Pikachu was already super cute, But Squirtle is so adorable too. Look at that round head of his, and that fierce, unconvinced look in his eyes and that little expression. It's just adorable, isn't it? Kaylin, please, stop holding me and let me go. I want to go play with those two little cuties. Kaylin couldn't help but twitch her lips. This was exactly what he imagined. Was it because after so long under the oppression of the family, this sudden release made him lose control? Although Lizuner had come into contact with Pokemon due to her family, most of them were fierce and brave looking. How could they have such a cute side? After all, in Lizuner's opinion, no matter which Pokemon's final evolution, no matter how cute it was when it was in trouble, it would eventually become a fierce and ferocious look, right? But the Pokemon the family encountered were, without exception, those in their final evolved forms, with rather ferocious looks. Zuner, hold on. You absolutely must hold on. They're in a Pokemon battle right now. If you go in like this, will they even have a chance to fight? Kaylin urged earnestly. Just when she thought Lizuner would remain unmoved by her advice and charge forward, she stood still, her eyes wide, as if stunned by what she was seeing. What's wrong? Why did you suddenly stop moving? This is really frustrating, Kaylin complained, but her gaze was honestly fixed where Lizuner was looking. That glance, even Kaylin, was stunned. She saw that, at some point, the two Pokemon had tacitly abandoned their special attacks and reverted to close combat. The feeling of each punch hitting flesh, the constant muffled thud, made everyone's heart pound. Pikachu, don't give up. Keep using Flash. Squirtle, show us your nerve and use Charge. Pikachu, use Flash with all your might. We're going to send you flying. Squirtle, use Shellback. Show us we're not to be trifled with. It turned out all this wasn't accidental. It was simply the result of the unusual rapport that had been built up between the two trainers over the years. Knowing his special attack, Squirtle was completely suppressed by the electric type, leaving him with no chance to counterattack. Rather than just sit there and wait for Pikachu to triumph, Xiaomao decided to go all out. He had Squirtle use his melee physical attack, hoping to engage in a close-quarters fight. Trying to use Squirtle's shell, a formidable defense, to break Pikachu's spear, a hopeless dagger. But Ash, true to his nature, embraced every challenge. Even his attitude felt a bit foolish, abandoning his own advantages to embrace the strengths of others. Because of this, Pikachu simply abandoned a previously promising situation and engaged in melee combat with the opposing Squirtle. But Squirtle was still Squirtle, and that shell wasn't just for show, it was the real deal. Ash's reaction was driven by his childhood rivalry with Mo, and he wanted to outdo Mo in every way possible. This was especially true in Pokemon battles, where Pikachu, with its superior stats, had the upper hand in special attacks. So, faced with a sudden shift to physical attacks, Ash naturally wanted Pikachu to engage, to see if he could suppress Cap. Then the battle will become a comprehensive suppression, which will also lay the foundation for what Xiaozhi has in mind. Chapter 794 Pikachu vs Squirtle. Faced with a sudden shift to physical attacks, Xiaozhi naturally wanted Pikachu to fight back, to see if he could suppress Cap. If so, the battle would become a complete domination, thus achieving Xiaozhi's goal. However, precisely because of this, the battle between the two Pokemon became extremely fierce, even more brutal than a duel using special attacks. In just a few moments, both Pokemon were covered in scars. Xiaozhi, this guy is really unwise. It was clearly a sure win, but he's going to lose it again with this. Lizuner finally recovered from her infatuation and regained her composure, observing the situation. She gently released Kaylin's hand and analyzed it. But what can we do about it? After all, this is Xiaozhi's unique style. Perhaps it's precisely because of this personality that I believe he will achieve great things in the future. After all, he and Yu are more or less similar. They both love Pokemon and Pokemon battles. This is perhaps why they were able to chat so well before. Kaylin thought secretly as she spoke. However, when he said this, Lizuner nodded, then shook her head. Clearly, Kaylin disagreed with this point. Sister Kaylin, I think you might be mistaken. Xiaozhi and Yu do have some similarities, but that's only in these two areas of Pokemon. Yu might not match Xiaozhi's love for Pokemon, but he does his best to prevent his Pokemon from suffering excessive damage. Take, for example, a situation like this. If Yu were commanding Pikachu, he would undoubtedly press the advantage, using his most potent abilities to attack, dealing devastating damage while leaving the opponent no chance. Or, as in this situation, both Pokémon are clearly battered. But with Yu, he can carefully and accurately assess the Pokémon's current state. Even if you were truly defeated, he wouldn't recklessly damage the Pokémon's foundation. Chen Kalin was stunned by Li Zuner's words. Was there such a thing? Why hadn't she noticed it before? However, Chen Kalin clearly had a different opinion on Li Zuner's point. No, you might also be able to assess the situation, as you say, and possess the qualities and qualifications required of a Pokémon trainer. But Xiaozhi treats his Pokémon completely as his companions, his family. This is why he respects their choices. Sometimes, when two Pokémon battle, what's needed isn't necessarily assessing the situation. It's the ability to truly understand the Pokémon's inner thoughts. How should I put it? Li Zuner asked, puzzled. For example, if two Pokémon have a natural grudge against each other, when they face off, what's needed isn't a trainer's assessment of the situation, but rather a trainer's ability to read the Pokémon's inner thoughts. What they need is a battle of dignity, because it involves their own dignity. In that case, no matter how much you love your Pokémon, you can't intervene to stop the fight. Otherwise, it could easily become a knot in the Pokémon's heart, preventing it from growing any stronger. Meanwhile, Li Zuner and Chen Kalin were discussing the situation between Xiaozhi and Yu. The battle situation shifted further. The two Pokémon, once evenly matched, gradually began to show their strengths and weaknesses as time went on. Squirtle, carrying a shell and having previously used several shell shrinking techniques to bolster its defenses, struggled against Pikachu's barrage of attacks. While it bore wounds, it wasn't a major problem. Reflective Pikachu was in a worse state. While its limbs still held onto the ground, they were shaky. The faint flashes of electricity that occasionally lit up its body further indicated that Pikachu was nearing exhaustion. After all, having previously been the primary attacker, Pikachu had already expended most of its energy. Furthermore, Pikachu wasn't known for its experience-based Pokémon, and after battling Squirtle, its stamina was beginning to run low. Ash, I advise you to give up quickly. Your Pikachu isn't in great shape right now. It's practically losing its ability to fight. For the sake of your Pokémon, you should take it back immediately. Xiaomao, seemingly struck by a thought, suddenly had a light in his eyes, and he spoke to Ash, who was standing across from him. Tisk, don't be so complacent. Who said my Pikachu is failing? How's Pikachu? Can you still fight? Ash retorted sternly, but his words and actions were sincere as he questioned the struggling Pikachu. Seeing this, Professor Oak nodded in satisfaction. A faint smile played at the corner of his mouth. Touching his bare chin, which lacked any beard, Professor Oak couldn't help but smugly think. Ho ha, you're truly worthy of being my grandson from the Great Dusk Snow City. You're truly amazing. You've only just acquired your first Pokémon and become a trainee Pokémon trainer. And yet you've already mastered the tactics of using your presence and words to overwhelm your opponent in Pokémon battles, cornering them and leading them by the nose. Truly amazing. It turns out that despite Xiaomao's confident and smug look, he's actually quite insecure. Only he knows the true state of Squirtle. While Squirtle appears energetic, as if he could fight another 300 rounds, he's actually just hanging on by a thread. Chapter 795 Pikachu vs Squirtle. While Squirtle still looked brimming with energy, as if he could fight another 300 rounds, he was actually just hanging on by a thread. Knowing the current strength of his side, Xiaomao had resorted to provoking his neighbor when he started. He constantly provoked his rival with words. After all, having grown up together, Xiaomao knew that Ash was impulsive, and a simple provocation would almost certainly lead him astray. At worst, while he wouldn't surrender, he could use this tactic to intimidate the opponent, who, judging by his current condition, could hold out much longer. Having reached this point, both Pokémon were now relying solely on their energy, the unyielding spirit instilled in them by their trainers. Now it all depended on which Pokémon would be the first to succumb and lose their fighting ability. Damn it, Pikachu, are you okay? He asked, facing his trainer's repeated, concerned inquiries. Pikachu felt his heart go limp, as if it were filled with something. He shook his head vigorously. Then, bracing himself again, Pikachu once again barked at Squirtle, his voice filled with defiance. Squirtle was immediately startled. Seeing Pikachu, who seemed to have regained his full strength, Squirtle couldn't help but feel a little timid. After all, the other party was too terrifying, especially the electric shock that left it numb all over. While it felt a little bit comfortable, the pain far outweighed it. That electric shock felt like it was killing him. Even if he retreated into his shell, he couldn't escape the pain it inflicted on his heart and soul. Xiaomao had noticed something was amiss with Squirtle by then. As a future Pokemon trainer, he panicked for a moment before forcing himself to calm down and quickly gathered his thoughts on a solution to the tree problem. And surprisingly, it seemed as if a solution had actually occurred to him. Squirtle, don't be afraid to use your tail-wagging attack. That was exactly what Xiaomao had thought of. Using a tail-wagging attack would lower the opponent's alertness, thereby reducing their defenses. Since his own Squirtle was already showing signs of fear, he might as well take advantage of the situation. He could use this to lure the opposing Pikachu into attacking Squirtle again, then seize the opportunity to launch a counterattack. Xiaomao's retreat to advance strategy actually had some effectiveness, at least against the usually impulsive Ash. And now, Ash was completely unaware of the trap Xiaomao was setting. He thought Xiaomao was completely helpless and was desperate, using any random skill to see if it could help. Sure enough, completely unaware of the effect of wagging its tail, Pikachu had let down its guard. Seeing the opponent, who had previously been locked in a fierce battle, now wagged its tail and pleaded pitifully for mercy. Pikachu, not too old, let out a joyful cry. But despite being overjoyed by the scene before him, Pikachu couldn't forget his trainer's order. Pikachu, go. Use Lightning Flash again. Lizuner, who had been watching with rapt interest, awaiting what would happen next, couldn't help but pat her forehead with her delicate hands. I'm floored. What kind of idiot teammate is this? Pikachu's working so hard, but how could Ash, the trainer, be so incompetent? Hanako, listening from the sidelines, was utterly embarrassed, especially after witnessing her son giving orders. She even pretended not to see or recognize him. Xiaomao couldn't help but curl his lips after hearing Xiaomao's orders. It seemed the bait had taken, but for the sake of the long term, he had to suppress his laughter. Xiaomao then looked like he was possessed by a movie star, certain to win the Oscar. As he watched Pikachu about to charge Squirtle, a look of fear crossed his face. There was even a hint of panic, a panic that Xiaomao clearly caught. Ash's smile widened. Xiaomao, I advise you to just admit defeat. This won't help. You're no match for me after all, really? Don't be so confident. You'll be slapped in the face for such confidence. Squirtle, use Shell. The instant the command was given, Squirtle reacted swiftly, leaping upward with its tiny body, its limbs, head, and tail instantly retracting into its shell. Just then, the shell-like Squirtle passed overhead. Coincidentally, at that very moment, Pikachu charged towards it. And just like that, with so many coming at it, and no time to break, Squirtle's shell plummeted from the sky, slamming down hard onto Pikachu's body. Fortunately, Pikachu reacted quickly. If he hadn't dodged the attack, he'd have a massive bump on his head, and his eyes would have been swollen, rendering him incapable of fighting. Even so, Pikachu was still badly injured after being hit like that. His body, which could have easily rushed forward, was immediately knocked to the ground. His originally cute expression became extremely tangled. His small eyes, like black gemstones, suddenly widened, almost bulging outwards. His little tongue was already hanging out of his mouth involuntarily. On the other hand, our Pikachu's Squirtle seemed to be fine, and didn't even know what had just happened. He peeked out like a sneaky thief, first slightly poking his head out of the shell to observe the surrounding environment. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 796 Turning Point. Squirtle cautiously poked its head out, observing its surroundings while keeping a wary eye on Pikachu. Where could it suddenly appear? After all, Pikachu's speed was incredibly fast, and even Squirtle, despite its small size and lack of evolution into Blastoise, couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. However, despite scanning the area for a long time, Squirtle still couldn't see Pikachu, which only made him even more confused. What was going on? How did it suddenly disappear? Could it be plotting something nefarious, trying to attack him from behind? With these thoughts in mind, Squirtle's tiny head retreated back into its shell, leaving only its tiny eyes to observe the darkness. This was from Squirtle's perspective, but Hall had us observing the battle from the trainer's perspective. Seeing Squirtle's cautious behavior would surely be a source of both laughter and tears. Pikachu! Pikachu's slightly angry cry suddenly echoed from nowhere. Squirtle's body trembled again, this time afraid to even open its eyes. Suddenly, Squirtle felt a pain all over his body, and his entire body began to fall backward. Bang! Pikachu had finally recovered from the impact of the blow. Seeing Squirtle not only hide him but also tossed him around, he was furious and flipped over, throwing Squirtle to the ground. But it seemed that this wasn't enough to vent its anger, and it couldn't avenge its actions. Pikachu immediately launched an electric shock, with small yellow-orange lightning bolts striking Squirtle. The sudden pain finally pulled Squirtle out of his shell. However, Pikachu's sudden flip gave Squirtle no time to prepare, and as a result, Squirtle landed on the ground with its shell facing downwards. At this moment, Squirtle's limbs and body emerged from its shell, appearing on all fours. Squirtle! Faced with a precarious situation before him and himself, Squirtle panicked. He screamed and kicked wildly, hoping to flip himself back over. However, Squirtle's limbs were too short to reach the ground, let alone flip himself back over. No matter how hard Squirtle struggled, it remained like a tumbler, unable to completely fall to one side. Pikachu! Seeing this, Pikachu burst into laughter. He stopped attacking and simply stood aside to watch the turtles flip. Damn it! Squirtle! Pull yourself together. Was Xiaomao completely as black as coal at this moment? Due to the Pokemon Zone problems, this situation made it impossible for Xiaomao to determine the outcome. Unless the opposing trainer could provide another assist, perhaps there would be a chance for a comeback. However, for Xiaomao, this all depended entirely on whether Xiaozhi would give him face. However, surprisingly, this time, the opponent was once again very respectful. However, this time, it wasn't Xiaozhi, the Pokemon trainer, but Pikachu, who had been so obedient before, who rebelled. Perhaps because of his previous experience, Xiaozhi had learned his lesson and didn't want to continue to tangle with the other team, so he gave a direct order. Pikachu, use electric shock. However, Pikachu was no longer as obedient as before, as if he hadn't heard his trainer's command at all. Looking at Squirtle, who was still struggling to turn himself over, Pikachu continued to taunt him mercilessly. As if this wasn't enough, Pikachu even approached Squirtle, who was lying on his back, unable to turn over. He stretched out his adorable little paw and patted Squirtle's mirror-smooth head. Then he tapped Squirtle's shell, leaning his ear forward to listen. The playful nature of this was obvious. Regardless, Pikachu refused to attack as his trainer instructed, remaining silent, as if playing a serious game with Squirtle. Squirtle, faced with such teasing from Pikachu, anyone would be irritated, let alone a little Squirtle. He immediately shouted at Pikachu in anger, baring his teeth and claws, ready to fight Pikachu to the death. But Pikachu remained unmoved, as if oblivious to Squirtle's angry expression, minding his own business. Pikachu had actually seen everything Squirtle did, but no matter how he looked at it, he felt relieved. After all, it was Squirtle who had just hit it, embarrassing it. And precisely because of this, it gave the other trainer an opportunity to exploit. Ash, you're too green to be a Pokemon trainer. I advise you to go back and train for 500 years before you start out again. Is it really fun for trainers and Pokemon to play tricks on each other? If so, let me put an end to it. Xiaomao's words were quite childish, but they were indeed impressive. Squirtle, seize the opportunity and use your water gun. Squirtle, the moment he came to his trainer to give the order, Squirtle, who had been furious, suddenly calmed down, as if Pikachu's teasing had ceased to exist. But the more Squirtle looked like this, the more annoyed Pikachu became. Hey, what's wrong with you? Do you really think I don't exist? How dare you ignore me? I'm going to make you suffer, Pikachu thought fiercely, unleashing his skills without hesitation. Chapter 797 Tai. Hey, what's wrong with you? Do you really think I don't exist? How dare you ignore me? I'm going to make you suffer, Pikachu thought fiercely, unleashing his attacks with considerable speed. A flash of lightning flashed, and just as Pikachu's electric attack was about to strike Squirtle, something unexpected happened. At that moment, Squirtle, who had previously looked so pitiful, defenseless and ready to be slaughtered, struck back just as the electric shock was about to hit and cover him. Just as Pikachu was about to strike, Squirtle's attention was distracted, and he immediately pouts, his mouth pouting, and a small stream of water is instantly ejected from the water. Pikachu had no time to react. He had never expected Squirtle, who had just been a piece of fish on the chopping board, to suddenly find the mood to fight back. Caught off guard, Pikachu's electric shock not only failed to land, but was interrupted once again by Squirtle's water gun. The man couldn't tell if it was luck, Squirtle's true strength, or perhaps even the sheer calculating nature of his trainer, Xiaomao. Squirtle, initially sprawled on his back, used the thrust from his water gun to block Pikachu's attack while simultaneously flipping over. Great, Squirtle. That's it. Don't give them a chance to react, use another impact. Xiaomao couldn't help but cheer upon seeing this. He immediately thought of pressing forward, and without hesitation, he gave the order to fight once more. But fate was fair after all. After Xiaomao's lucky break, Xiaozi's luck also arrived. After flipping over again, Squirtle, barely able to find its balance after its initial flip, heard its trainer's command and charged forward once more. However, it struggled to stabilize itself and adjust its center of gravity. Pikachu's charge didn't get very far before, hampered by its shell, it stumbled and fell. Sliding forward in a dreadful, mud-chewing position, its once impressive appearance now utterly disastrous. It wasn't clear if it was a coincidence or some divine intervention, but Squirtle had slid right up to Pikachu's face. When Squirtle finally recovered and raised his head, he was met with a pair of furious eyes glaring back at him. Squirtle was startled, his once powerful cry weakening slightly. Pikachu's eyes held a hint of fear. This time, Pikachu seemed completely enraged, not even bothering to use any of his skills. He immediately lunged at Squirtle with his claws and fangs bared. Squirtle, before he could even react, was instantly knocked to the ground, but the pain instantly sobered him up. Squirtle didn't even bother to use any skills to fight back, instead engaging in a fierce, Pikachu-like struggle. It was truly a battle of one. I punch you punch me, I kick you kick me. I bite you bump me. Though the battle lacked the brilliance of skills, it was still incredibly exciting. The muffled thud of punches hitting flesh was thrilling. However, neither the spectators nor the trainers were smiling. Instead, their faces looked grim. Squirtle, stop and use Shell. Pikachu, use Flash, create some distance, then use Electro. Ash and Ash were both shouting orders, hoping the Pokémon would obey and retreat to recover. However, the two Pokémon were completely engulfed in a fierce battle, facing each other's fierce gazes without responding to their commands. They were simply lost in this primal battle. Damn it! What's going on? Why is Squirtle suddenly ignoring my orders? Pikachu, what's wrong with you? Hurry and do what I tell you. The two rookie trainers, Ash and Ash, were visibly panicked. Professor Oak, the referee, watched this scene unfold. He shook his head repeatedly, sighing helplessly. Ultimately, he could only shout upward, Dragonite, make these two stop. Why aren't they just getting along? Fighting is so bad. It'd be terrible if they accidentally damaged anything nearby. Quick! Upon receiving his trainer's order, Dragonite, launching from the sky, flapped its tiny wings and dived at top speed, creating powerful gusts of air. The mere force of the air separated the two Pokémon who had been locked in a fierce struggle. They tumbled to the sides, each tumbling before they could react to what had happened. A large voice blocked their path, completely obscuring their view. Grandpa, what are you planning to do? Our battle isn't over yet. Are you planning on sending out Dragonite to show off again? Now is not the time, Professor Oak, our battle isn't over yet. Please stop interfering. This is the battle we've been waiting for. Ash quickly echoed Mao's words. Faced with the two little creatures' incessant shouting, Professor Oak remained expressionless and snorted heavily. Your long-awaited battle ends here. As the referee, I declare the battle between the two Pokémon turned with both of you simultaneously incapacitated. Therefore, your Pokémon battle ends in a draw. Why? Grandpa, that's not fair. That's right. My Pikachu still has some fighting ability. Just give me a little more time and I'll definitely defeat Squirtle. Mao and Satoshi were clearly unconvinced by Professor Oak's announcement. Chapter 798 Training. Why? Grandpa, this isn't fair. That's right. My Pikachu is clearly still capable of fighting. Just give me a little more time, and I'll definitely defeat Squirtle. Faced with Professor Oak's announcement, Xiaomao and Xiaozhi were clearly unconvinced. Why, do you think your Pokémon are still capable of fighting? Professor Oak's face was serious, and he glanced at the two children who were still unconvinced. Isn't it true? Squirtle is clearly still capable of fighting. Okay, the same goes for my Pikachu. I believe that if I give him a little more time, Pikachu will definitely defeat the opposing Squirtle and make him lose his fighting power. Oh, really? Then take a closer look at the two Pokémon on the field. After hearing the two Pokémon's impulsive excuses, Professor Oak simply said this, then put his Dragonite back into its Pokéball, put his hands behind his back, and watched the situation unfold quietly. If both of your Pokémon can continue fighting, I won't interrupt you. Instead, you can continue fighting. If you win, I'll give you a reward. Really? Grandpa, there's a reward if you win. In that case, Squirtle, then we have to give it our all, isn't it? Pikachu, let's continue. However, the two Pokémon, who had been so full of energy and unwilling to accept Professor Oak's words, looked at each other in bewilderment after seeing the situation unfold. Their once fluent words became halting and their voices grew increasingly quiet. In the battle arena, the two Pokémon, who had been grappling with each other after being stopped by Dragonite, no longer had the energy they had just had. They were now sprawled on the grass, as if every ounce of energy and strength had been drained from their bodies, like a puddle of mud. If it weren't for the occasional humming sounds they let out, one would have thought they were dead. Pikachu, how are you? Are you okay? Ash was the first to react, of course. Upon seeing this, he immediately ran over, scooped Pikachu up in his arms, and began observing closely. The nervousness on his face betrayed his current state of mind. Squirtle, how are you? Cheer up. Then it was Mo, who, having realized what was happening, rushed over. Grandpa, Squirtle, how is it? Why is it like this? Shouldn't it have been like this just now? Yes, Professor Oak, come and check on Pikachu. After calling out to no avail, Mo and Ash decisively turned to Professor Oak, the strongest of the group and the one who knew the Pokémon best. As if unable to pretend any longer, Professor Oak sighed helplessly. Seeing the two little guys so worried about their Pokémon's condition, he felt deeply relieved. Although their initial heated argument had led them to ignore the Pokémon's condition, they had initially ignored it. But overall, these two guys at least showed genuine concern for their Pokémon, and that was enough. Professor Oak walked over and took just a quick look at the two Pokémon, and he immediately determined their current condition. Pikachu and Squirtle, these two little guys are fine. They're just exhausted and a little tired. Let them rest and they'll recover. After confirming that playing with Pokémon was fine, Professor Oak breathed a sigh of relief. Nothing's wrong, that's good. Xiaomao also breathed a sigh of relief at this time, and couldn't help but hold Squirtle tightly in his arms. Ash, staring intently at Pikachu in his arms, said from the bottom of his heart, Pikachu, thank you. You've worked so hard this time. It's all my fault. Just get some rest, you two are such idiots. You're both considered Pokémon trainers now, aren't you? You might be rookie trainers, fresh out of the gate, and haven't even started your journey yet, but you're still trainers after all. Can't you be more mature? You have to consider not just your own situation, but also the situation of the Pokémon you're connected to. If you keep acting like this, how can I let you go on your journey? You know, the world outside isn't like Pallet Town. While it's full of excitement, it's also fraught with danger. One careless mistake could cost you your life at any moment. Perhaps because of what they had just experienced, Ash and Mamoru felt differently. Faced with Professor Oak's machine gun-like lecture, they didn't resist as they had at first. Instead, they humbly sought his advice. They listened attentively to Professor Oak's repeated words of advice, knowing that he was genuinely concerned for them when he reminded them before their trip. While Professor Oak was giving instructions to Xiaomao and Xiaozhi, Lizunar and Chen Kalen returned, led by Hanako. Seeing her son, who was as obedient as a son under Professor Oak's guidance, Hanako couldn't help but chuckle. It's true that sometimes, Professor Oak's advice from an outsider is more effective than her own. After all, even though Xiaozhi was an adult, he still had a rebellious streak, and sometimes he only listened to his mother's words twice. As a mother, Hanako was somewhat reluctant to let her child go on a solo trip, but more so because she worried that her son wouldn't be able to take care of himself. However, Hanako, understanding, knew that the young eagle would eventually leave and soar high in the sky. Therefore, Hanako would often give Satoshi some advice, intentionally or unintentionally. However, with Satoshi's carefree personality, these words would go in one ear and out the other, completely ineffective. On the contrary, Professor Oak's words of advice, especially the boy's humble attitude and attentive listening, reassured the mother. Chapter 799 Initial Pokémon. In general, the most important thing when traveling is to ensure your own safety and take good care of both your Pokémon and yourself. As for Pokémon trainer battles, I can't teach you anything about that. It all depends on your daily practice and hard work with your Pokémon. Only by experiencing the mysteries of this firsthand can you truly gain something. As for what others say, you probably won't gain much either. Professor Oak's lecture was drawing to a close, but he looked at the two children, who were now like docile little rabbits, listening to his lecture without a murmur. Finally, he added, I wish you a happy journey tomorrow. Let's all have some fun tonight. Don't be so nervous, everyone. Tomorrow is the beginning of an exciting trip. Let's all go capture Pokémon together, haha. Professor Oak, that's really like you. Chen Kalen couldn't help but let out a teasing laugh as he watched Professor Oak return to his normal work. Haha, it can't be helped, it's just professional habit. However, Xiaozhi and Xiaomao are also rookie trainers, and I'm also sending this message to the past. I also send this message to the rookie trainers who are traveling today. I hope everyone will go and recapture Pokémon together. A better tomorrow awaits us. Scratching his head, Professor Oak seemed a little embarrassed, but he still said what he wanted to say in his heart. At this moment, seeing Chen Kalen and Lizuner arrive, Xiaozhi and Xiaomao also put away their obedient attitude just now. After all, they thought that they were a little embarrassed. But it was more of a case of overestimating one's own abilities, overestimating one's own strength. So they immediately changed the subject and asked the questions they had been wanting to ask. Sister Zuner, Sister Kalen, I heard from Professor Oak that you're planning to leave here tomorrow and go on a trip together. But we haven't seen your two Pokémon before. You're probably just like us, training for the newbies, right? Without beating around the bush, Ash directly expressed his doubts. While Xiaomao might seem a bit arrogant due to his status and his feud with Ash, he's actually quite a nice, kind-hearted child. Upon hearing Ash's words, he immediately responded. Yes, Sister Kalen, Sister Zuner, you really don't have any Pokémon, do you? If that's the case, I can have Grandpa give you that Gachapon machine. Maybe you can even get some high-potential Pokémon. I'm sure Grandpa wouldn't be stingy with it. Hearing his grandson's seemingly generous words, Professor Oak couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. His grandson was truly generous. You know, despite his harsh words, the Pokémon Gacha machine did contain many high-caliber Pokémon. He had specially prepared them for his grandson. Of course, there were also a few less talented Pokémon. However, when it came to giving one Pokémon each to Chen Kalen and Lizuner, Professor Oak showed no remorse. He was simply speechless at his grandson's excessive generosity. After all, if he were so generous to everyone, even the wealth of his family would be squandered. Everyone's eyes turned to Lizuner and Chen Kalen, waiting for them to say something. Professor Oak even opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but nothing came out. Although the two women had come to him to learn Pokémon knowledge through his friend's introduction, Professor Oak didn't know much about them. But out of trust in his friends, he didn't ask too many questions. After all, everyone has their secrets. Moreover, with his years of experience, he knew the two women before him were likely no simple characters. Therefore, after spending so much time together, he hadn't asked much about their families or the Pokémon. However, over this period of time, Professor Oak gradually began to accept these two bright and clever women, Lizuner and Chen Kalen. Just like you before him, he had completely accepted them. This was another reason why Professor Oak didn't refuse when Xiaomao offered to give them each a starter Pokémon with high potential. I don't think that's necessary, Lizuner said, feeling a little embarrassed by the intense gazes from the crowd around her. She lowered her head, and it was Chen Kalen who finally politely declined. However, Xiaomao didn't understand the meaning behind this, assuming the two women were just being embarrassed, and immediately spoke again. It's okay, it's okay. Sister Zuner, Sister Kalen, you've been living here for so long, and we've all gotten to know each other. Giving you one or two Pokémon is really nothing. After all, my grandfather is a famous Pokémon professor, and he has quite a few Pokémon with potential. That's probably the case. As he spoke, Even Xiaomao grew uncertain. After all, how could he know which Pokémon had the most potential, not knowing how to look? The only ones he could discern, in his subconscious, were the starter Pokémon and the near-legendary Pokémon of each region. He rolled his eyes and glared at his grandson. Professor Oak seemed a little frustrated. His grandson really didn't understand the situation, yet he dared to speak so boldly. But it was all right. With his family's wealth, he'd probably have lived a life of luxury before his death. Thinking this way, Professor Oak wouldn't directly say such heartbreaking words to hurt his grandson's feelings. Instead, he looked at Chen Kalin and Li Zuner kindly. Zuner, Kalin, you don't have to be so polite. Just like Xiaomao said, we've all gotten to know each other so well, I even consider you family. If you really don't have any starting Pokémon, just let me know. I can't say for the others, but I can still help you get the 3 starters from different regions. Chapter 800, Professor Oak shows off his muscles. Professor Oak sounded so confident, even patting his chest, fearing the 2 women wouldn't believe him. Looking at the enthusiastic grandfather and grandson before them, Chen Kalin and Li Zuner felt the words they wanted to refuse caught in their throats, unable to utter them. After all, the concern these people showed for them was genuine. Despite some reluctance, Li Zuner and Chen Kalin spoke up anyway. After all, they already had their own starter Pokémon, and they didn't want to deceive those who truly cared about them. While telling the truth might mean missing out on 2 high-status starter Pokémon, their inner convictions wouldn't allow them to deceive those they cared about. First of all, Professor Oak and Xiaomao, we'd like to thank you for your kindness. There's really no need to trouble you, we already have our starter Pokémon. After a moment's silence, Chen Kalin, the eldest sister, finally spoke up. What do you mean you already have a starter Pokémon? Yeah, I'm incredibly curious about that, too. How did you get one? Xiaomao asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Then, Professor Oak followed suit. They were all desperate to know what the 2 women's starter Pokémon were. After all, Chen Kalin and Li Zuner had been living with them for a while, and they hadn't released any. Could it be that their Pokémon were so rare that they were afraid others might snatch them away? So they'd been keeping them in secret, bringing them into the house when we weren't paying attention, or perhaps they'd been secretly nurturing them somewhere. Professor Oak, a seasoned expert in life, quickly figured it out. He patted his chest once more, even raising his arms in a powerful pose. 2 enlarged Pokeballs had appeared in his hands without him noticing. Zuner, Kalin, could these be your 2 Pokémon? They're too rare to show to others. But don't worry, we're all family here. Just bring out your Pokémon and let us all see them. It'll be a great way to get to know them and broaden our horizons, right? After all, those 2 little brats next to you are just novice trainers, and they haven't seen much of anything yet. Professor Oak, a Pokémon researcher, was completely fired up at this moment. He was filled with curiosity, eager to know what kind of Pokémon these initial Pokémon were. If they were truly rare Pokémon, wouldn't it mean he would have 2 more materials for research? The thought of this inexplicably excited Professor Oak. He was especially excited when he remembered that Xiaoyu possessed Suicune, one of the 3 sacred beasts. After all, Li Zuner and Chen Kalin were very familiar with Xiaoyu. Judging from their familiarity, Chen Kalin and Li Zuner's backgrounds were undoubtedly quite impressive, considering Professor Oak already knew Xiaoyu. Behind him, her master, Zhao Kuang, possessed a legendary Suicune. His possession of a legendary Suicune made him wonder, since Xiaoyu already possessed a legendary beast, did that mean Chen Kalin and Li Zuner also possessed legendary beasts of similar caliber? The thought of this inexplicably excited him. 2 more reports on legendary beasts were about to be in his hands. After all, for Pokémon researchers like them, the most sought-after Pokémon to study were naturally the rarest. Legendary beasts were even more coveted. Some Pokémon researchers, despite their high reputations and apparent mastery of the field, were not the same as high-ranking figures like Professor Oak. There were indeed some differences between them. I won't dwell on the major differences, as some Pokémon research wasn't the primary focus. The Pokémon projects were fundamentally different. Some of these professors focused on single Pokémon. Some aren't, as they study Pokémon's characteristics. Others go beyond simply studying Pokémon's attributes and focus on their daily habits. Those at the highest levels, like the Grand Curtain, are more extensive and comprehensive. Professor Oak has a knowledge base covering nearly every aspect of Pokémon. While some aren't top tier, they're nearly proficient. This is why Professor Oak has become one of the top Pokémon professors in the league. You have to understand that top Pokemon researchers like Professor Oak, except for those who have made significant contributions to the league, don't often retain such a prestigious honor and status. And even among those top Pokemon researchers, only a handful manage to study a single legendary beast in their lifetime. Some never even see one, relying solely on images and other information to judge and study it. Who else can offer the same level of treatment and skills as Professor Oak, the opportunity to personally experience, touch, and observe a creature firsthand? And it was precisely because of this that Professor Oak was so excited and curious about Pokemon like the legendary beast. However, facing Professor Oak's action, which was like a declaration of force, Chen Kalen and Mizuna looked at each other with strange expressions, and their expressions were actually a little conflicted. What, don't you still trust me, an old man? Don't worry, as long as you have the magical feeling and release the treasure, an old man, will definitely protect their safety. Professor Oak thought the two women didn't believe him, and immediately became a little anxious. In order to show off his strength and muscles, he even took off his white coat. Not only that, after taking off the white coat, Professor Oak even started to remove the shorts he was wearing underneath. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.